My name is Hannah Fernandez. I spent 26 years believing loyalty was a foundational requirement of family. That belief dissolved the night I caught my mother brokering the sale of my relationship to advance my younger sister's career. 3 years ago, I sat at my parents' dining room table in suburban Nashville, tracing a water ring on the mahogany wood. Across from me sat Noah, my boyfriend of 3 years. He reached for a dinner roll, and the cuff of his linen shirt slid back, revealing a platinum chronograph with a midnight blue dial. My chest tightened. I manage healthcare supply chains for a living. My brain is trained to track inventory and mismatching data points. 6 days prior, my sister, Olivia, an A&R executive for a prominent record label, had paraded a velvet box through this very house. She boasted about securing that exact limited-run timepiece for a priority client to guarantee a signature on a lucrative management contract. Now that same watch was ticking against the pulse of the man I intended to marry. I needed air. I pushed my chair back and excused myself toward the kitchen. The hallway felt thick with humidity and the smell of roasted garlic. The swinging door to the kitchen stood open just a crack. My mother, Diane, was leaning against the granite island, handing Noah a freshly poured drink. I stopped breathing. "You cannot keep stalling, Noah," my mother murmured. Her manicured nails tapped the countertop in a rhythmic calculation. "The industry is moving past you. Hannah is a sweet girl, but processing hospital supplies will not get you into the studio with the right people." Olivia holds the label checkbook. She has the venue contacts. If you want a real career, you need to align yourself with a daughter who can actually fund it. I stood frozen in the dim hallway, waiting for the man who kissed me that morning to set his glass down. I waited for him to defend our 3 years of shared quiet mornings and promised futures. Noah stared at his shoes. He did not raise his voice. He did not walk away. He took a slow, deliberate sip of his drink and nodded. By the time this story concludes, I would pack my life into cardboard boxes, leave Nashville behind, and build a reality they could never access. And 3 years later, my parents would walk into a lavish charity gala, demanding to speak to the billionaire CEO who was about to dismantle my sister's corporate empire, only to realize the man they were trying to intimidate was my husband. Welcome back to Amanda Told Stories, where quiet women finally stop absorbing the pain and start handing back the receipts. If you have ever been the dependable daughter sacrificed for the golden child, tell me your age and where you are listening from in the comments. And make sure you hit subscribe, because this story ends with a shattered bourbon glass and a paper trail that left my family with nothing but their curated lies. The muggy Tennessee air felt heavier when I returned to the patio. Cicadas buzzed a steady rhythm in the oak trees, providing a deceptive background track for a family that had just engineered my replacement. Noah offered a tight, oblivious grin as I pulled my chair back in. Olivia sat beside him, twisting a strand of dark hair around her finger. She talked loudly about the VIP lists she controlled for the upcoming music awards, making sure everyone at the table understood her influence. I did not scream. My hands rested flat on my lap. Working in logistics trains you to evaluate failing systems without emotion. The relationship was bankrupt. My parents were the brokers. I was simply the liquidated asset. I picked up my silver fork, placed it perfectly parallel to the knife on my porcelain plate, and stood up. "Where are you going, honey?" my father, John, asked. He focused intensely on cutting his steak. My father spent his life avoiding friction, choosing to inspect his food rather than notice the tension vibrating across the table. I looked at my mother, who watched me with sharp, calculating eyes. I looked at the platinum dial on Noah's wrist, reflecting the patio string lights. "I am going home," I said. My voice sounded thin, like it belonged to a stranger. The drive back to my apartment was a blur of neon streetlights and highway signs. My mind categorized the grief into neat, manageable compartments. The betrayal did not stem from Noah. Noah was an opportunist, a man whose ambitions always outpaced his actual output. He was a bad investment. The true theft belonged to the people who raised me. The next morning, my phone screen lit up with a text from my mother. "We need to talk. Meet me at the coffee shop on West End." She did not call to check if I was breathing. She called to manage the fallout. I arrived 10 minutes early. I ordered black tea because my stomach rejected the thought of anything heavier. The smell of roasted espresso beans usually brought me comfort, but today it just made me nauseous. My mother walked in, wearing a tailored blazer and a smile that did not reach her eyes. She slid into the booth across from me and placed her designer purse on the empty chair. She folded her hands on the table. "Hannah, we need to be practical about this," she began. Her tone carried the smooth, practiced cadence of a corporate negotiator. "Practical," I repeated. The tea burned the roof of my mouth, but I welcomed the sting. It grounded me. "You orchestrated a handoff between your daughters. You call that practical?" She sighed the way someone sighs at a stubborn child. "You are taking this personally, and you really should not. Noah has talent, but he lacks capital. Olivia has the capital. She has a real career. You process supply chains for clinics. You offer him a nice, quiet life. Olivia offers him a legacy. We are just putting the right pieces together for his success." She spoke about my sister and the man I loved as if they were assets in a ledger. There was no mother sitting across from me. There was only a talent agent protecting her best client. Olivia was the bright, flashy star of the Fernandez family. I was the dependable scaffolding meant to support her. A memory flashed in my mind. I was 10 years old, standing in a department store while my mother returned my favorite winter coat just to afford a sequined pageant dress for Olivia. The pattern had always been there. The realization clicked into place cold and firm. I was never a daughter to her. I was collateral. I slid my tea across the table. The ceramic mug stopped inches from her hand. "Then you can have him," I said. "But you do not get to have me." I stood up, leaving her mid-sentence. By noon, I submitted a formal transfer request to my company's Memphis division. Memphis sat hours away, deep in the flat Mississippi River Valley. A different pace, a different world. I spent the weekend wrapping 3 years of shared history in bubble wrap and boxing it away. The sharp rip of packing tape echoing in my empty apartment felt like the only honest sound I had heard in days. On Sunday, my father left a voicemail. He talked about the humidity rolling in from the Smoky Mountains for 2 full minutes. Then he added a single rushed sentence right before the beep. "Your mother says you are upset, but please do not cause a scene and ruin Olivia's industry mixer on Friday." I stared at the glowing screen of my phone. That single sentence erased any lingering doubt. My grief was just an inconvenience to their social schedule. I did not call him back. I loaded my boxes into the trunk, locked the door of my apartment, and drove out of Nashville before the sun came up on Monday, choosing the quiet highway over an undignified argument. The tires of my sedan hummed a low, steady drone against the asphalt of Interstate 40. The sun had not yet breached the horizon, leaving the Tennessee hills bathed in a cold, bruised purple. I kept the dashboard lights dimmed. The digital clock glowed a pale green, reading 4:15 in the morning. My phone sat in the cup holder connected to the car audio. I pressed a button on the steering wheel and played the voicemail one last time. The audio crackled slightly before my father's voice filled the quiet cabin. He sounded tired, but comfortable, a man speaking from his favorite leather recliner. "Hey, Hannah, it is Dad," he began. The audio captured the faint sound of a television playing a golf tournament in the background. The humidity out here is thick today. The Weather Channel says a cold front is pushing through the Smoky Mountains by Thursday, so make sure you check your tire pressure. I kept my eyes on the highway. My knuckles rested lightly against the steering wheel. For 40 seconds, he discussed barometric pressure and cloud formations. He built a wall of mundane facts to delay the discomfort of parenting. Then his tone shifted, dropping half an octave into a hushed register. Your mother told me about the coffee shop. Listen, I know you are upset. It is a tough situation for everyone. But Olivia has that big industry mixer on Friday, and label executives are flying in from New York. Please do not cause a scene and ruin this for her. We all have to make sacrifices. Give me a call later. The recording ended with a sharp digital beep. A tough situation for everyone. As if a natural disaster had randomly struck our family, rather than a calculated theft orchestrated in his own kitchen. I deleted the message. I did not shed a single tear. Crying requires a belief that someone will care enough to comfort you, and I had long ago stopped expecting comfort from the people who viewed my existence as a utility. My mind drifted back to the coffee shop meeting with my mother 2 days prior. The memory played in high definition. The sharp scent of roasted espresso beans had turned my stomach the moment I walked through the glass doors. Diane sat in a corner booth bathed in the harsh morning sunlight. She wore a tailored beige blazer, her posture impeccable, her face an emotionless mask of efficiency. When I slid into the booth, she did not ask how I slept. She did not reach across the table to hold my hand. Instead, she folded her hands neatly over her leather planner and presented her case like a corporate attorney finalizing a merger. Noah needs A&R connections to survive the Tennessee music scene, Hannah, she had said. Her voice cut through the ambient chatter of the cafe. She spoke with a chilling pragmatism. You process shipping routes and hospital supplies. You offer him a stable, quiet routine. Olivia offers him a legacy. She has the capital to put him in the right recording studios. We are simply being practical. I traced the rim of my ceramic mug, feeling the heat radiate against my fingertips. She was reducing my entire career, my independence, my logistics degree, to a punchline. In her eyes, my stability was worthless because it could not be monetized on a red carpet. I stared at the gold pendant resting against her collarbone. It was a gift from my father on their 20th anniversary. I wondered how she could wear a symbol of commitment while actively dismantling mine. You are brokering a handoff between your daughters, I said. My voice remained level, betraying none of the acid churning in my stomach. She sighed. The sound carried a heavy weight of manufactured disappointment. You are taking this personally, and you really should not. We are putting the right pieces together for his success. Her phrasing unlocked a door in my memory, a vault I had kept sealed for 16 years. The scent of espresso faded, replaced by the sterile smell of department store floor cleaner and new fabric. I was 10 years old. We stood under the bright fluorescent lights of a high-end retail store in downtown Nashville. I was clutching a heavy red wool coat. It had black velvet buttons and a silk lining. I had begged for it for 3 months, saving my allowance doing extra chores, meticulously tracking my progress in a small spiral notebook. That notebook was my first lesson in logistics. I handed the coat to the cashier, feeling a profound sense of pride. Then my mother stepped in. She placed a hand on my shoulder, a firm, restrictive pressure. "Put it back, Hannah," she instructed. Her voice held no room for negotiation. I looked up, confused. "I have the money," I told her, showing my crumpled bills. "Olivia needs a new sequined dress for the regional pageant on Saturday," Diane said. She took the coat from my hands and pushed it across the counter to the cashier. "Process a return on this, please." I watched the cashier ring up the transaction. I watched my mother take the cash and walk directly to the formal wear section. She held a turquoise gown up to my 7-year-old sister, smiling as Olivia twirled in the mirrors. I stood alone by the registers, shivering in my thin denim jacket. That was the exact moment I learned the family currency. I was an expense. Olivia was an investment. I existed to be trimmed, returned, and reallocated whenever the golden child required more funding. Sitting in the coffee shop 16 years later, the pattern laid itself bare. Diane was not just stealing my boyfriend. She was balancing her books. Noah was the new turquoise gown, and I was the red coat being returned to the rack. I did not argue. Arguing implies a hope of changing the other person's mind. I slid my untouched tea across the table. The ceramic scraped against the wood. "You can have him," I told her. "But you do not get to have me." I stood up and walked out, leaving her sitting with her planner and her hollow pragmatism. The memories faded as the highway signs shifted from Tennessee green to Mississippi blue. The sun began to rise, casting long golden shadows across the flat river valley. My logistical training had taken over the moment I left that cafe. I returned to my apartment and initiated a swift clinical extraction. I packed my life into identical cardboard boxes, labeling them with a black marker: books, winter clothes, kitchenware. I submitted a formal transfer request to my corporate office, requesting placement in the Memphis Healthcare Division. They approved it within 4 hours, citing my spotless record and efficiency. I chose distance over an undignified screaming match. If I stayed in Nashville, I would become the bitter, jilted sister hovering on the edges of their curated photographs. They would paint me as the jealous outcast who could not handle her sister's success. By leaving in the middle of the night, leaving no forwarding address and offering no dramatic final speech, I denied them their favorite narrative. I denied them the spectacle. The Memphis skyline emerged on the horizon, a silhouette of steel and glass rising from the riverbanks. It was a city built on blues music, cargo shipping, and medical innovation. A city that valued hard work over flashy aesthetics. I exited the highway and navigated toward my new temporary apartment. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. A text message from Olivia. I ignored it. She was likely sending an unsolicited photo of a red carpet event, weaponizing her stolen happiness to gauge my reaction. I turned the phone face down. I was no longer absorbing their hits. I was laying the foundation for a fortress they could never access. I parked the car, cut the engine, and stepped into the humid morning air, ready to build a new architecture for my life. One where the facts could not be manipulated, and my presence could never be edited out again. Memphis felt entirely distinct from the glittering hollow hills of Nashville. The air here carried the heavy industrial weight of the Mississippi River, tasting faintly of diesel exhaust and damp earth. This was a working metropolis that operated on sweat and logistics, a place where cargo ships and freight trains dictated the rhythm of daily life. I secured a senior director position, managing supply networks for the largest healthcare conglomerate in West Tennessee. My days consisted of rerouting surgical equipment, anticipating critical shortages, and ensuring trauma centers received emergency supplies before their inventory dropped into the red zone. I thrived inside the predictable matrices of my spreadsheets. Numbers possessed an inherent honesty that my relatives severely lacked. If a shipping route failed, the data displayed the failure instantly. There were no hidden agendas in a supply chain. My phone still vibrated with occasional digital intrusions from my former existence. Olivia viewed my silent departure not as a protective boundary, but as a direct insult to her victory. She needed an audience. She required me to witness her triumph, otherwise her theft held zero value. So she dispatched unsolicited images to my inbox. The screen would periodically illuminate with a high-resolution photograph of her and Noah standing against a step-and-repeat banner at some exclusive music industry gala. In one particular image, Noah wore a designer velvet blazer he certainly could not afford on a struggling producer's non-existent salary. Olivia stood beside him, clutching a crystal champagne flute, her smile perfectly calibrated for the flashing cameras. She never included text with these images. The subtext shouted loudly enough on its own. She wanted me to feel the crushing weight of my supposed failure. She intended for those glossy pixels to elicit deep envy. Instead, I examined them with the clinical detachment of a forensic auditor reviewing a fraudulent expense report. I saw a man compromised by his own greed and a woman desperately purchasing temporary affection to mask her profound insecurities. I deleted every image immediately, leaving the messages unread. I refused to supply the emotional reaction she so desperately craved. My sanctuary existed 3 blocks from my apartment building, a 24-hour diner named Riverbend Cafe, featuring faded vinyl booths and the persistent, comforting aroma of dark roast coffee and toasted sourdough bread. I occupied the same corner booth every Tuesday and Thursday evening, spreading my logistics files across the scratched Formica tabletop. I relished the anonymity. No one in this establishment cared about record deals or VIP guest lists. It was a rainy November evening, when the diner was unusually crowded, that a stranger approached my table. He wore a simple charcoal sweater and carried a battered leather briefcase. His demeanor exuded a quiet, unassuming confidence entirely devoid of the performative swagger Noah constantly projected. He gestured toward the empty vinyl seat across from me, politely inquiring if he could share the space, since the remaining tables were currently occupied. I nodded, gathering my highlighters and shipping manifests closer to my side. He sat down, opened his briefcase, and extracted a dense stack of legal documents. He did not attempt to impress me with loud phone calls or boastful anecdotes. For 45 minutes, we existed in a comfortable, shared silence, punctuated only by the clinking of ceramic coffee mugs and the scratching of our pens. When the waitress finally arrived to refill my cup, she accidentally bumped my elbow, causing a stack of unorganized invoices to scatter across the damp floor. Before I could bend down, the man smoothly retrieved them. He stacked the papers neatly, aligning the edges perfectly before handing them back. He glanced at the top sheet, which displayed a complex routing algorithm for distributing cardiac monitors across 3 state lines. "You optimize transit routes," he noted. His voice sounded rich and steady, lacking any trace of Southern pretension. "I manage healthcare supply chains," I replied, expecting him to quickly lose interest. Most people found my profession exceedingly dry and overly technical. He smiled, a genuine, warm expression that reached the corners of his eyes. "That requires a rare type of structural brilliance. Keeping fragile things intact while navigating unpredictable environments is no small feat." "I am Ethan, by the way." "My name is Hannah," I said. That evening marked the inception of a radically different kind of relationship. Ethan Caldwell became a permanent fixture in my weekly routine. Our connection did not ignite with explosive dramatic sparks. It developed gradually, like a solid architectural foundation being laid brick by brick. We discussed global shipping delays, Southern literature, and the peculiar comfort of working late into the night. He possessed a profound appreciation for my clinical, grounded nature. Whenever I dissected a complex logistical problem using pure logic rather than emotion, he did not call me cold. He called me formidable. Noah had treated my stability as a boring safety net, a dull necessity he endured while waiting for a more glamorous opportunity to arrive. Ethan viewed my intellect as my most captivating asset. He remembered small, specific details without ever seeking praise for his attentiveness. He noticed I preferred black tea over coffee after 5 in the afternoon. He observed that I organized my pens by specific color gradients, He offered a tranquil refuge from the transactional chaos I had recently escaped. As months turned into a full year, our quiet diner meetings evolved into weekend drives along the winding river and shared dinners in his minimalist downtown loft. I fell deeply in love with his absolute authenticity. He drove an older model sedan, wore unbranded clothing, and never spoke boastfully about his finances. I assumed he worked as a mid-level manager or a senior analyst at one of the local corporate firms, based on the thick legal contracts he frequently reviewed. I never pressed for details because his income was entirely irrelevant to my happiness. Simultaneously, a new internal strategy crystallized in my mind. I made a deliberate, unyielding decision to keep Ethan hidden from my family. If Diane discovered I was dating someone new, her immediate reaction would not involve asking if he treated me with kindness. She would instantly demand his job title, evaluate his earning potential, and calculate how his social standing might benefit the Fernandez brand. She would attempt to assign him a rigid monetary value. I refused to let her tainted arithmetic touch the purest thing in my life. I constructed an impenetrable fortress around my new relationship. I posted 0 pictures on social media. I mentioned no names during the rare obligatory holiday phone calls with my father. Ethan remained a phantom to the Nashville crowd. Ethan respected my boundaries without questioning my motives. When I explained that my relatives viewed people as leverage rather than loved ones, he simply held my hand and told me we would protect our peace at all costs. We were building a private universe, insulated from the optics of my past. However, insulating yourself from a broken system often provokes that very system to hunt you down. Silence acts as a major threat to people who rely on constant attention for their survival. My mother and sister realized their silent treatment had failed to break my spirit. My lack of reaction starved them of the validation they desperately needed to feel superior. Since I would not engage with their digital provocations, they decided to escalate their tactics. They needed to force my compliance, and they devised a method that would require a physical, mandatory response. The quiet safety of my Memphis refuge was about to be severely tested. The mail carrier dropped a thick, oversized envelope into my metal mailbox. The heavy cream cardstock felt unusually rigid against my fingers. It was not a casual letter or a standard greeting card. It was a formal summons disguised as a celebration, designed specifically to drag me back into the shadows so the golden child could shine brighter on her big stage. And it arrived bearing a subtle, intentional insult printed right on the pristine front cover. The heavy cream envelope felt foreign in my hands. I stood by the kitchen island of my Memphis apartment, listening to the steady hum of the refrigerator. The paper stock was unnecessarily thick, the kind of material selected specifically to communicate wealth and status before the recipient even breaks the wax seal. I ran my thumb over the raised golden calligraphy tracing the letters of my own name. Or rather, the letters they chose to use. The calligrapher had written, Hannah Fernandez. They dropped the final letter of my name. It was a small error, but it carried a profound weight. My mother had undoubtedly proofread the guest list multiple times. She was a woman who noticed a misplaced salad fork from across a crowded banquet hall. She possessed a terrifying attention to detail when the detail served her image. Letting an invitation leave her house with my name spelled incorrectly was not a clerical oversight. It functioned as a quiet, deliberate erasure. It communicated exactly how little space I occupied in her mind. I was an afterthought, an obligatory checkmark on a wedding planner spreadsheet. Before opening the envelope, I tapped the screen of my tablet resting on the granite counter. Earlier that morning, a former coworker from Nashville had forwarded me a link to a prominent local lifestyle magazine. The digital feature displayed a sprawling 6-page spread celebrating the upcoming nuptials of music industry power couple Olivia Fernandez and Noah Pierce. I swiped through the glossy high-definition photographs. They posed on a rustic wooden bridge leaning against an antique sports car, wearing clothes that looked artificially distressed. The accompanying article spun a fairy tale narrative about two creative souls finding each other through their shared passion for the arts. The journalist wrote that they had been inseparable for years. The timeline was cleverly blurred, erasing my entire existence from Noah's past. My sister had rewritten history and published it in glossy print. I set the tablet face down and finally broke the golden wax seal on the envelope. Inside, a heavy card detailed the venue, a historic plantation estate outside Nashville, known for hosting celebrity events. The date was set for early September. Tucked behind the formal response card, I found a small yellow sticky note. The bright neon square clashed harshly against the elegant ivory stationery. My mother's distinctive slanted cursive filled the tiny space. The note did not contain a greeting. It read, "Please plan to sit near the rear exits during the ceremony. The photographer from the magazine requires unobstructed angles of the bridal party, and your presence near the front might confuse the narrative for the readers. Also, please wear a muted charcoal or navy dress so you blend into the background." I stared at the ink. The sheer audacity hung in the quiet air of my kitchen. Diane was not inviting her eldest daughter to witness a milestone. She was managing a potential public relations crisis. She wanted me there solely to avoid the whispers of the country club gossips who might question my absence. Yet she needed me hidden, pushed to the very edges of the room, wearing camouflage so I would not disrupt the perfect aesthetic she had purchased. My training in supply chain logistics taught me how to identify a forced binary choice. A forced binary occurs when a system presents you with two options that both lead to a systemic failure. Diane had designed a flawless psychological trap. Option 1 dictated that I attend the wedding. If I showed up in my drab navy dress sitting by the exit doors, I would officially accept the role of the pathetic, jilted sister. I would become a prop in their victory lap. Option 2 dictated that I decline with an angry, emotional outburst. If I called her crying or screaming, I would hand them the exact ammunition they desired. They could shake their heads and tell the magazine reporters that poor Hannah was too bitter and unstable to support her family. Both paths resulted in my humiliation. The only way to defeat a forced binary is to refuse participation in the system altogether. I reached into the drawer beside the sink and pulled out a black ink pen. I did not shed a tear. I did not feel the familiar hot sting of betrayal that used to accompany my mother's actions. I felt only the cold, sterile clarity of a business transaction closing. I unfolded the response card. I placed a neat, dark check mark inside the box labeled "Declines with regret." On the line designated for dietary restrictions, I wrote a single short phrase: prior professional obligations. I did not offer an apology. I did not wish them well. I provided a sterile, factual data point. I am unavailable due to work. I sealed the response card inside the return envelope, ensuring the postage sat perfectly straight. Next, I opened my laptop and navigated to the department store website listed on their registry. The registry featured absurdly expensive items: crystal decanters, imported silk bedding sets, silver-plated serving trays. I bypassed all the luxury goods and scrolled to the bottom of the list. I found a medium-sized stainless steel toaster. It was the most generic, soulless appliance available. I purchased it using standard shipping. When the website prompted me to type a personalized congratulatory message for the happy couple, I left the text box entirely blank. A silent toaster arriving on a Tuesday afternoon. It was the logistical equivalent of a dial tone. As I closed my laptop, a soft click signaled the front door unlocking. Ethan stepped into the apartment, shaking a few stray raindrops from his dark jacket. He carried a brown paper bag, smelling faintly of the Thai takeout we had ordered for dinner. He paused in the entryway, his eyes scanning the kitchen island. He noticed the tablet, the heavy cream envelope, the sealing wax scattered on the counter, and the yellow sticky note resting by my hand. He set the food down and walked over to me. He did not immediately ask what happened. He simply stood beside me, offering a steady, grounding presence. I let out a long, heavy sigh. The breath felt like it carried 3 decades of accumulated exhaustion. "Rough day?" Ethan asked softly. I picked up the misspelled envelope and handed it to him. He read the calligraphy. He noticed the missing letter. Then his eyes dropped to the yellow sticky note on the counter. He read my mother's demands. His jaw tightened, a subtle shift in his otherwise calm demeanor. "This is not an invitation, Hannah," he stated. His voice carried a low, protective edge. "This is a containment strategy." I leaned against his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of his arm through his shirt. "They are trying to write the final chapter of their fairy tale," I explained. "And in their version, I am the ugly background detail they need to airbrush out. Frame by frame, they are editing me out of the family picture." Ethan wrapped his arms around my waist, pulling me close. "What are you going to do?" he asked. I rested my head against his chest, listening to the steady, reassuring rhythm of his heart. "I am just finally letting them do it," I told him. "I am stepping out of the frame." That decision marked the true severing of my ties to Nashville. By refusing to engage, I starved their drama of its necessary fuel. The toaster was delivered. The wedding occurred without me. I heard through a distant acquaintance that Olivia threw a minor fit when she realized I had actually stayed away, denying her the satisfaction of seeing me sit in the back row. But the noise of their lives grew fainter and fainter, until it became nothing more than a distant static. My focus shifted entirely to the life Ethan and I were constructing in Memphis. Our days were filled with quiet routines, shared coffee on Sunday mornings, and profound mutual respect. We built a partnership rooted in transparency. Yet, as we moved closer toward permanently binding our lives together, a hidden variable in Ethan's world began to surface. It was not a dark secret or a betrayal. It was a structural reality regarding his true position in the corporate landscape. A reality that would soon place my fragile peace on a direct collision course with the exact people I had just erased from my life. The grand ballroom of the Heritage Hotel hummed with the specific frequency of Nashville's elite, a blend of expensive perfume clinking crystal and whispered industry gossip. Light refracted through the overhead chandeliers, catching the crisp edge of a platinum chronograph resting on a man's wrist. The wearer's fingers suddenly loosened. A heavy highball glass slipped from his grip, descending in slow motion before exploding into sharp shards across the polished marble floor. Right there, amid the fragmented ice and spilled bourbon, the curated facade of the Fernandez family finally broke. But to understand how we reached this precise point of destruction, we have to rewind the clock 36 months. 3 years passed with the quiet, steady rhythm of a well-calibrated machine. The chaotic noise of Nashville faded into a distant hum, replaced by the structured peace I built alongside Ethan. We married on a crisp October morning in the Great Smoky Mountains. The ceremony possessed none of the theatrical production my mother demanded for her events. We hired no photographers, we arranged no floral arches, we invited 0 guests. We simply stood on a wooden deck overlooking a deep valley shrouded in morning mist, holding hands while a local magistrate read the vows. The silence surrounding us felt profound. It was a marriage built on reality rather than optics. I wore a simple ivory dress, and Ethan wore his dark suit, and the only audience we required was the ancient pine trees. During those 3 years, the full scope of Ethan's professional life had gradually seamlessly integrated into my own. I had discovered shortly before our engagement that the quiet man who shared my diner booth was not a senior analyst. Ethan Caldwell was the chief executive officer and primary shareholder of Caldwell Holdings. His conglomerate owned the very healthcare network that employed me, along with commercial real estate portfolios across the Southeast. Yet, his immense wealth never manifested in loud displays. He still drove his older sedan. He still preferred dark roast coffee from a local roaster. He viewed money the same way I viewed supply chains. It was merely a tool for creating stability. Recently, Caldwell Holdings had begun expanding its reach, diversifying its portfolio by acquiring struggling entertainment and media properties throughout Tennessee. Ethan handled these acquisitions with a surgical precision, seeking out bloated, mismanaged companies and restructuring them for profitability. It was a Tuesday evening in late autumn. Rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of our home office in Memphis. A fire crackled in the stone hearth, casting a warm, amber glow across the room. I sat at one end of a long mahogany desk, reviewing quarterly transit logs for medical supplies. Ethan sat at the opposite end, illuminated by the focused beam of a brass reading lamp. He was reviewing a stack of dense legal dossiers for a new acquisition. The room was silent, save for the tapping of my keyboard and the soft shuffle of his paperwork. I paused to stretch my neck, glancing over at the folders stacked near his elbow. The top dossier bore a thick, glossy cover. Embossed in the center of the dark cardstock was a silver geometric logo, a stylized sound wave forming the shape of a crown. My fingers hovered over my keyboard. I recognized that logo instantly. It was the insignia of Sovereign Sound, the parent record label headquartered in Nashville. It was the exact corporate entity that employed my sister. That silver crown funded Olivia's designer wardrobe, paid for her exclusive industry mixers, and bankrolled the studio time for Noah's perpetually stalling music career. I stared at the embossed silver lines. My pulse remained steady, but my logistical mind immediately snapped into a heightened state of focus. I watched Ethan turn a page, making a note in the margin with his fountain pen. "What are you reading, Ethan?" I asked. My voice sounded remarkably calm given the sudden intersection of our two worlds. He looked up from the document. He glanced at the silver logo, then looked directly into my eyes. He possessed a terrifying memory, and I knew he recognized the significance of the company name. We had discussed my sister's employer during a late-night conversation years ago. "This is the preliminary financial disclosure for Sovereign Sound," he replied. He closed the folder, resting his hands on top of it. "The board authorized a hostile takeover last week. The label is bleeding capital through severe executive mismanagement. We are purchasing their debt and initiating a comprehensive restructuring." The words hung in the warm air of the office. A hostile takeover. Comprehensive restructuring. In corporate terminology, those phrases translated to forensic audits, liquidations, and the immediate termination of redundant staff. "Does your acquisition target include the A&R division?" I inquired, keeping my tone strictly professional. Ethan nodded slowly. "The A&R division is their highest area of unchecked expenditure. They have been hemorrhaging funds on vanity projects and unrecouped artist advances. My financial team estimates we will need to audit every single executive account going back 5 years. He paused, reading my expression carefully. Ethan knew the depths of my history. He knew the psychological warfare my mother had waged using Olivia's supposed corporate success as the ultimate weapon. He understood that Sovereign Sound was the financial engine powering the Fernandez family delusion. "Hannah," he said, his voice softening slightly, "I can hand this entire portfolio over to my chief operating officer tomorrow morning. I can recuse myself from the Sovereign Sound acquisition. I have zero desire to invite your past into our home. If handling this company brings that toxicity anywhere near you, I will step away from the deal right now. I looked at the silver crown on the legal folder. I thought about the misspelled wedding invitation sitting in my memory. I thought about the yellow sticky note demanding I hide in the back row to protect their aesthetic. I remembered my mother sitting in a coffee shop reducing my quiet, stable life to a punchline while praising the legacy Olivia was building. That legacy was currently sitting in a folder on my husband's desk, classified as a distressed asset. A softer person might have asked Ethan to spare the label, to protect her sister from the impending corporate slaughter. A vengeful person might have asked for a front row seat to watch the destruction. I was neither. I was a logistician. When a system rots from the inside, you do not shield it from the consequences. You let the natural friction of reality grind it down. I looked back at Ethan. The firelight caught the quiet intensity in his eyes. He was offering me a shield, but I no longer needed one. Do not recuse yourself, I told him. My voice carried the firm, unyielding weight of absolute emotional detachment. You are acquiring a failing business. Proceed strictly as business. Do the audits, review the ledgers. Paperwork does not lie, Ethan. If they built their kingdom on solid ground, they have nothing to fear from your accountants. A faint smile touched the corner of his mouth. He understood exactly what I was saying. I was removing the protective barrier of family loyalty that had shielded Olivia for her entire life. I was letting her face the real world without a safety net. Are you certain? He asked, tapping his pen against the desk. I am positive, I replied, turning my attention back to my own transit logs. Just treat them like any other liability. Ethan opened the folder again and resumed his reading. The rain continued to beat against the glass, isolating us in our warm, impenetrable fortress. The dramatic irony of the situation settled over me like a heavy, invisible blanket. At that exact moment, somewhere in Nashville, my mother was likely bragging to her country club friends about Olivia's untouchable corporate influence. Olivia was probably swiping a company credit card to purchase another round of drinks for Noah and his aspiring producer friends. They were living in a curated fantasy, entirely oblivious to the reality rushing toward them. They possessed no idea that the billionaire chief executive poised to dismantle their entire operation was the very same man who kissed me goodnight. A substantial, unarguable administrative hammer was currently suspended directly over the Fernandez family. The countdown had officially started. But a failing system rarely collapses quietly. When the pressure begins to build at the top, the panic eventually trickles down. As Sovereign Sound started feeling the initial tremors of the Caldwell Holdings takeover, Olivia's budget began to shrink. Her corporate credit lines froze. And when the golden child faced a deficit, my mother always sought external resources to balance the books. It was only a matter of time before their desperation forced them to look toward Memphis, setting the stage for an uninvited intrusion. The corporate tremors initiated by my husband began rippling through the Nashville music industry faster than either of us anticipated. Within a month, the financial freeze hit Sovereign Sound. Expense accounts were suspended. Corporate credit lines were abruptly declined at exclusive restaurants. The mysterious new buyers were demanding a strict ledger review before releasing any further operational capital. Panic acts like a virus in a mismanaged company, and the infection quickly spread to the A&R department. It was a Thursday afternoon when the consequences of that freeze physically breached my sanctuary. I was sitting in my glass-walled office on the 14th floor, overlooking the wide, muddy expanse of the Mississippi River. I was reviewing a complex procurement contract for a new wing of cardiac surgical suites. The work required intense focus. Then my desk phone chirped. It was Marcus, the head of ground floor security. His deep voice sounded uncharacteristically hesitant. "Ms. Fernandez, there are 2 women in the lobby demanding to see you. They claim it is a family emergency, but they refuse to sign the corporate guest registry." I did not panic. I saved my spreadsheet, locked my computer screen, and took the elevator down to the main floor. The lobby of my building was a testament to modern industrial efficiency. Polished terrazzo floors gleamed under recessed lighting flanked by brushed steel security turnstiles. There, standing near the front desk, were my mother and my sister. They looked like exotic birds that had accidentally flown into a sterile laboratory. Olivia wore a silk trench coat and designer sunglasses pushed back onto her head. She gripped a leather tote bag so tightly her knuckles appeared bone white. The relaxed, arrogant posture she usually maintained was gone, replaced by a frantic, frayed energy. Diane stood beside her, wearing her signature tailored blazer, projecting an aura of entitled authority that failed to impress the Memphis security staff. When the elevator doors parted, Diane spotted me. She did not open her arms for an embrace. She marched past the waiting area, ignoring the security guard's warning, and stopped 2 feet in front of me. "You are a very difficult person to track down, Hannah," my mother stated. Her voice echoed slightly in the cavernous room. "You ignore our messages, and you keep your address unlisted. We had to call your old landlord just to find out which logistics firm you transferred to." I maintained a neutral expression, keeping my hands resting loosely in the pockets of my slacks. "You drove 3 hours on a weekday without an invitation," I replied. "I assume this is not a social visit." Diane let out a sharp breath, feigning exhaustion. "We do not have time for grudges today. Your sister is in a crisis and we need your help. The label is undergoing a severe corporate restructuring. Some faceless conglomerate is purchasing Sovereign Sound, and they have frozen the operational budgets. Olivia has been tasked with organizing the annual charity gala to introduce the current executives to the new board of directors." Olivia stepped forward, her voice uncharacteristically high and tight. "It is the most important event of my career, Hannah. The new buyers are evaluating everyone. If this gala is a success, I keep my job and secure a promotion. But they slashed my event budget by 70%. I am expected to host 500 industry elites, and I cannot afford the premium caterers, the staging, or the floral arrangements." Diane placed a hand on my arm, a gesture of false intimacy that made my skin crawl. "This is where you come in, sweetheart. You negotiate bulk freight and food service contracts for hospitals. You know all the wholesale vendors across the state. We need you to use your little supply chain job to secure the catering equipment and raw materials at cost. You can pull some strings, route some favors. Just handle the background logistics so Olivia can focus on the VIP guest list and the aesthetics." I stood perfectly still. The sheer audacity of the request hung in the cold, air-conditioned environment of the lobby. For 3 years, they had treated my existence as a shameful secret. They had mailed me an invitation with a misspelled name and demanded I hide in the shadows of a life they stole from me. Now the golden child was failing. Her unearned corporate power was evaporating under the scrutiny of an actual audit. And their immediate instinct was to drive across the state to demand free labor from the daughter they had discarded. They did not view me as family. They viewed me as a warehouse, a convenient resource to be depleted whenever Olivia's account ran low. The dramatic irony pulsed through the room, radiating like heat from a pavement. Olivia was begging for scraps to throw a party to impress the new corporate overlords. She possessed no idea that the chief executive officer she was desperately trying to appease was the same man who shared my morning coffee. She wanted me to cater the very event where my husband would eventually evaluate her worth. I gently removed my mother's hand from my arm. "I am not a caterer," I stated, my voice level and clinical. I manage multi-million-dollar medical supply routes. I do not route favors. Diane narrowed her eyes, the fake warmth vanishing instantly. Do not be ungrateful, Hannah. We are your family. Family takes care of family. I looked at the two of them processing their desperation through the lens of a strict business transaction. I can offer you independent consulting services, I said. I will review your vendor contracts and negotiate wholesale rates for your gala. My consulting fee is $250 an hour, with a minimum retainer of $5,000 paid upfront. Olivia gasped, taking a step back as if the floor had shifted beneath her designer heels. You want to charge me? She shrieked, her voice cracking. My own sister wants to invoice me for a favor? You are charging your own blood, Diane hissed, her voice dropping into a venomous whisper. You are doing this to punish us. You are still holding on to the past, and you are using this crisis to exact some petty revenge. You have always envied your sister, and now you want to profit off her hardship. I did not defend myself against the accusation. Defending yourself implies that the other person's opinion holds weight. In negotiations, whoever speaks the most loses the most ground. I reached into my blazer pocket, pulled out a stark white business card, and handed it to Olivia. She took it reflexively, her hands trembling with a mixture of rage and panic. Email my assistant the event specifications and the requested vendor lists, I instructed, ignoring my mother's outburst entirely. If the retainer clears my account by tomorrow morning, I will assign a junior coordinator to source your equipment. If the wire transfer does not arrive, you can serve tap water and stale crackers at your gala. I turned around and walked back to the security desk. I swiped my identification badge over the scanner. The glass gates glided open with a soft electronic chime. I stepped through, leaving them standing in the sterile lobby completely unmoored. They had expected compliance. They had expected me to fold under the heavy guilt of family obligation. Instead, they received a corporate rate. As the elevator doors slid shut, blocking their shocked faces from my view, a new strategic advantage formed in my mind. By agreeing to handle the catering logistics via email, I was giving Olivia a highly detailed operational puzzle for her to obsess over. While she hyper-focused on arguing with me over the cost of salmon fillets and table linens, she would remain entirely blind to the real danger. The tactical trap was set. She would be too distracted fighting a phantom war with her sister to notice the forensic accountants closing in on her department. The notification arrived on my secure banking application at exactly 8 in the morning on Friday. A wire transfer of $5,000 cleared into my independent consulting account. The sender was listed as Sovereign Sound Event Programming. I did not feel a rush of victory. I simply felt the cold, familiar click of a supply chain puzzle locking into its starting position. I opened a fresh, encrypted spreadsheet and began the clinical process of executing the contract. I treated the Nashville Charity Gala exactly like a regional hospital wing deployment. The objectives were identical: source the required materials, negotiate the freight costs, establish the delivery timelines, and eliminate any systemic inefficiencies. I routed all communications regarding the event to a designated email folder. I established a strict boundary. I would not accept voice calls. I would not participate in video conferences. Every exchange required a time-stamped digital record. Olivia operated under a singular, profound delusion. She believed I cared enough to enact vengeance. People who navigate life through manipulation always project their own motives onto their surroundings. My sister had survived her entire youth by undermining her peers. She stole friends in middle school. She stole credit for collegiate group projects. She stole my relationship in adulthood. Naturally, she assumed I would utilize my logistical access to serve cheap appetizers and humiliate her in front of the Nashville elite. She braced herself for an emotional war. She began sending frantic paragraphs filled with capitalized letters. She demanded ironclad guarantees that the caterers would not utilize frozen ingredients. She requested exhaustive background profiles on the floral designers. She wanted to taste test the organic salmon sourcing before I finalized the wholesale order. Her messages reeked of a desperate, paranoid energy. She believed I was hiding landmines in the dinner menu. I responded with sterile document attachments and standardized vendor agreements. I stripped all emotion from the exchange. When she sent a sprawling email accusing me of intentionally hiding the premium champagne suppliers, I simply replied with a hyperlink. The link directed her to the statewide beverage distributor containing the wholesale pricing tiers. I offered no defense. A stone wall gives no feedback. My silence only served to amplify her paranoia. This dynamic functioned as a brilliant, unintentional decoy, a red herring woven entirely from her own profound insecurity. While Olivia squandered her valuable working hours interrogating pastry chefs over the density of buttercream frosting, she ignored the actual threats circulating through her office building. Back in Memphis, I sat in my quiet home office reviewing my transit logs. Across the room, Ethan reviewed the daily reports from his acquisition team. Caldwell Holdings had deployed a squad of forensic accountants into the Sovereign Sound headquarters. These auditors were not interested in the aesthetic success of the upcoming gala. They sought truth hidden in the ledger sheets. They demanded 5 years of unrecouped artist advance records. They required itemized receipts for every corporate credit card assigned to the talent division. Ethan mentioned over dinner that the label executives were being unusually evasive. He sat across our dining table swirling a glass of sparkling water. He noted that the head of the talent department kept missing critical compliance deadlines. The auditors were requesting basic travel expense reports, and the executive kept claiming she was too busy to compile the data. I chewed my food and nodded, offering no inside intelligence. I knew exactly why the head of the talent department failed to submit her expense reports. Olivia was prioritizing the lighting design of a temporary ballroom over the survival of her own career. She delegated the urgent financial inquiries from the auditors to unpaid collegiate interns. She pushed the ledger reviews to the very bottom of her overflowing inbox. Her focus remained entirely locked on my email address. She truly believed the most dangerous battle line existed between Memphis and Nashville. It was a fascinating administrative trap built entirely by her own ego. If she had possessed the humility to trust my professional integrity, she could have outsourced the party logistics and dedicated her energy to hiding her financial discrepancies. I would have secured the catering and faded into the background. Instead, she spent her days micromanaging the linen swatches. She demanded daily updates on the exact shade of ivory for the table runners. I watched the digital paper trail unfold from 300 miles away. Olivia requested specialized ice sculptures imported from a neighboring state. I approved the freight routing, secured the discount, and sent her the invoice. The auditors in Nashville requested proof of return on investment for 3 distinct recording studios. Olivia ignored their email and sent me a 3-page critique on my proposed seating chart. She was building her own professional coffin and decorating it with expensive imported orchids. Diane occasionally interjected her own demands into the email chains. My mother sent messages insisting that the premier tables receive upgraded crystal glassware. She reminded me that the Fernandez family reputation rested on this specific detail. She tried to leverage guilt, suggesting that a good sister would absorb the cost of the upgrade. I processed the glassware request, applied the wholesale discount, and updated the running total on her outstanding balance. I never addressed her reminders about family loyalty. I treated Diane like a mid-level project manager, overstepping her clearance level. The isolation drove them both into a frenzy. They needed friction to feel important. My clinical compliance offered 0 friction. It was like they were punching water. They could not generate a dramatic storyline because I refused to play a character in their script. Their exhaustion began to bleed into their personal lives. The stress of the unfunded gala, the paranoia regarding my involvement, and the looming corporate shadow started creating severe fractures within their inner circle. The pressure inevitably sought out the weakest structural point in their curated world. That weak point was Noah. He possessed no actual capital and zero genuine talent. He relied entirely on Olivia's corporate access to maintain his illusion of success in the music industry. He needed her to fund his studio time and introduce him to the prominent producers. As Olivia's attention fractured between fighting me over catering menus and dodging the Caldwell accountants, she neglected her primary role as his financial sponsor. The studio time stopped being booked. The luxurious dinners ceased. Olivia was too stressed to coddle his ego. The tension in their shared Nashville condominium reached a boiling point. Noah realized the golden goose was spending all her time fighting a phantom war with her sister, while the actual corporate hunters circled their camp. His survival instincts began to hum. He was a parasite who sensed his host was dying. He needed a reliable secondary host. The impending collision would soon prompt him to reach out into the dark, seeking the very stability he had previously discarded. The rain had finally stopped in Memphis, leaving the city streets slick and reflective under the amber glow of the streetlights. It was Tuesday morning, exactly 2 o'clock. The digital clock on my bedside table glowed a soft blue. Ethan was asleep, breathing evenly next to me. The heavy silence of the apartment was interrupted by a short, sharp vibration against the nightstand. My phone screen illuminated the dark room. Usually a late-night notification in my line of work meant a logistics crisis, a grounded cargo plane, or a delayed medical supply truck. I reached over and picked up the device, expecting to read an urgent dispatch from a warehouse supervisor. The name on the screen did not belong to a freight dispatcher. It belonged to Noah. The message sat in a gray text bubble, 3 sentences crafted to simulate vulnerability. Hannah, I cannot stop thinking about Memphis. The environment here is suffocating, and I really miss your steady calm. Please tell me you are awake. I stared at the glowing pixels. 3 years ago, a message like this might have triggered a rush of adrenaline. A younger version of myself might have felt a fleeting sense of victory, believing that the man who discarded her had finally recognized his profound mistake. The younger me might have typed a response, seeking closure or demanding an apology. The current version of myself felt nothing resembling validation. I did not feel a swell of triumph. I only felt the cold, clinical recognition of a parasite attempting to switch hosts. Noah was experiencing the crushing pressure of the Caldwell Holdings corporate acquisition. The walls of his curated reality were contracting. I locked my phone and sat up, swinging my legs over the edge of the mattress. The hardwood floor felt cool against my bare feet. I walked into the kitchen, poured a glass of filtered water, and leaned against the granite counter. My logistical training allowed me to assemble the disparate data points I had collected over the past few weeks. Ethan had shared minor details about the forensic audit occurring at Sovereign Sound. The accountants were actively hunting for 5 years of missing capital. They were demanding receipts for unrecouped artist advances and unexplained promotional budgets. Meanwhile, Olivia was frantic about covering the catering costs for a single charity gala. The plot twist crystallized in my mind, illuminated by the pale moonlight filtering through the kitchen blinds. Noah was not a successful music producer. He never had been. I remembered the platinum chronograph he wore at that final Sunday dinner. I recalled the designer velvet blazer he modeled in Olivia's unsolicited red carpet photographs. Those luxury items were not the spoils of a lucrative recording contract. They were purchased using diverted corporate funds. Olivia had been quietly embezzling operational capital from her A&R department to finance his entire existence. She utilized label resources to buy his studio time, acquire his wardrobe, and manufacture the illusion of his industry relevance. He had not chosen my sister because she possessed superior networking connections. He chose her because she held the keys to an unguarded corporate vault. He required stolen cash to sustain his vanity project. And now that the Caldwell Holdings auditors were standing inside the Sovereign Sound headquarters, demanding itemized ledgers, the vault was officially sealed. The stolen funds were gone. The pressure was shattering their relationship. Olivia was likely terrified, directing her panic toward the catering menu because she could not face the reality of a federal financial crime. Noah, possessing the survival instincts of a cornered animal, recognized that his primary financial sponsor was sinking. The luxury dinners had vanished. The free studio sessions were canceled. The glamorous facade was peeling away to reveal a terrifying administrative nightmare. So he reached out into the dark, seeking the steady, dependable woman he had abandoned. He believed my quiet nature equated to weakness. He assumed I would offer a safe harbor, a comfortable return to normalcy while the storm consumed my sister. I took a slow sip of water. He fundamentally misunderstood my character. I was not a safety net. I was a record keeper. I unlocked my phone and opened the messaging application. I did not type a reply. Engaging with a manipulative person grants them permission to negotiate your boundaries. Silence is an answer they cannot manipulate. Instead, I pressed my finger against the screen and highlighted his late-night message. I selected the forward option. I typed in my own secure encrypted email address. In the subject line, I typed a clinical, factual description, Noah Pierce communication, timestamped 2 a.m. I hit send. The text message vanished from my primary display, converted into a permanent digital record stored securely on a remote server. I handled his attempt at emotional manipulation the same way a seasoned paralegal processes evidence for a forthcoming trial. I stripped it of its intended power and reduced it to a raw data point. If he ever attempted to spin a false narrative about this night, I possessed the unarguable proof of his betrayal. I deleted the original text from my phone, erasing his digital footprint from my daily life. I washed my glass, set it on the drying rack, and walked back to the bedroom. Ethan shifted in his sleep, his hand reaching out to find my shoulder. I laid down beside him, pulling the heavy duvet over us. I felt a profound sense of security, knowing that the chaos unfolding in Nashville could not penetrate the walls we had built. The following days passed with a rapid, relentless momentum. The charity gala was rapidly approaching. Olivia finalized her vendor selections, her emails growing increasingly frantic and disjointed. I processed her final invoices, transferring the logistical burden entirely to the venue staff. I fulfilled the parameters of my consulting contract with flawless precision, leaving no room for her to claim I had sabotaged her event. My focus shifted toward our own preparation for the evening. The gala was not merely a social obligation for us. It served as the official public introduction of the Caldwell Holdings leadership to the Nashville entertainment sector. Ethan needed to evaluate the venue, the attendees, and the remaining operational staff of the label he was actively purchasing. We required appropriate attire. I did not visit a flashy department store to select a sequined gown. I requested a private appointment at a quiet, bespoke tailor in downtown Memphis. I chose a structured floor-length dress in a deep forest green. It possessed clean architectural lines, offering an understated authority. It was the antithesis of the loud, attention-seeking garments my mother and sister always favored. The bespoke tailor adjusted the hem, kneeling on the floor with a mouthful of pins. She remarked on my calm demeanor, noting that most women preparing for a high-profile gala arrived in a state of high anxiety. I thanked her for the observation. I felt no anxiety because I was not attending the event to perform. I was attending the event to observe a conclusion. The morning of the gala arrived crisp and clear. Ethan and I packed a small leather travel bag and initiated the 3-hour drive across the state. The highway lines blurred past my window, a reverse commute of the exact journey I had taken 3 years prior. I watched the rolling green hills of Middle Tennessee rise on the horizon. The landscape felt familiar, but entirely stripped of its former emotional weight. I reviewed the digital guest list on my tablet as Ethan navigated the interstate. I noted the names of prominent record executives, local politicians, and minor celebrities. Near the bottom of the alphabetized registry, I located the Fernandez family: John, Diane, Olivia, and Noah. They were granted entry. They were walking into a room entirely ignorant of the structural reality beneath their feet. They believed they were arriving to secure their social status and impress an anonymous corporate entity. They assumed I would be hidden in the background, managing the catering staff out of sight. They possessed no idea that the venue was quite literally owned by the man driving the car. They did not comprehend that their financial survival depended on the husband I had kept completely hidden from their view. The trap was fully constructed, resting silently in plain sight. The forensic audit was nearing its final, devastating conclusion. The stolen funds were documented. The misallocated corporate resources were cataloged. All that remained was for the subjects to walk through the front doors of the ballroom and trigger the mechanism themselves. I closed the tablet and rested it on the center console. Ethan reached over and covered my hand with his own. His palm felt warm and steady. "Are you ready for tonight?" he asked, keeping his eyes on the road ahead. I looked out the window, watching a highway sign for Nashville pass by in a blur of green and reflective white. I thought about the misspelled invitation, the yellow sticky note, and the shattered expectations they had tried to force upon me. "I am ready," I said. We exited the interstate and merged into the dense city traffic, navigating toward the premier event venue. The final confrontation was no longer a theoretical concept. It was a scheduled appointment. The administrative hammer was polished, raised, and waiting for the designated hour to strike. The afternoon sun slanted through the soaring arched windows of the Heritage Hotel Grand Reception Hall, casting long geometric shadows across the polished marble floor. Dust motes drifted lazily in the beams of golden light, illuminating a space undergoing a meticulous transformation. In mere hours, this cavernous chamber would host the most influential figures in the regional entertainment sector. Currently, the room belonged entirely to me. I walked along the perimeter, my low-heeled shoes producing a steady rhythmic click that echoed up toward the vaulted ceiling. I felt no urge to rush. Panic serves as the inevitable byproduct of poor planning. I paused by a central dining station, tracing the crisp, folded edge of an ivory linen napkin. The catering crews moved around me with quiet efficiency, executing the exact operational blueprint I had finalized from my home office weeks prior. Every chafing dish, every crystal water goblet, and every floral centerpiece sat in its designated coordinate. The air smelled of roasted pine and fresh eucalyptus, contrasting sharply with the crisp chill of the industrial air conditioning. I wore my bespoke dark green dress. The structured fabric provided a sense of understated authority, lacking the desperate flashiness that characterized typical Nashville social attire. Pinned near my left collarbone rested a small, brushed silver magnetic tag catching the ambient light. The engraving did not identify me as an event coordinator or a freelance vendor. The crisp black lettering read, "Hannah Caldwell, Chairwoman Caldwell Charity Foundation." Wearing that specific title felt like donning a layer of impenetrable armor. It represented a life built on merit rather than manipulation. It was a factual statement of ownership that nobody could debate or diminish. A minor logistical friction caught my attention near the entrance of the VIP lounge. The floor manager, a seasoned professional with graying hair, stood holding a digital tablet, his brow furrowed in frustration. He was staring at a row of silent auction display podiums that inadvertently blocked the primary thoroughfare leading to the cocktail bar. I approached him, offering a polite nod. He braced himself, likely anticipating a shrill reprimand. The Nashville service industry conditioned its workers to expect unhinged tantrums from high-profile organizers experiencing pre-event anxiety. If we shift the auction displays 15 degrees toward the eastern wall, I suggested, keeping my voice even and collaborative. That adjustment widens the pedestrian corridor by 3 feet. It prevents a traffic bottleneck during the initial reception hour and subtly guides the attendees directly toward the beverage stations. The manager blinked, processing the spatial geometry. He looked at the floor, then back to his tablet. A relieved smile broke across his face, easing the tension around his eyes. "You are entirely correct, Miss Caldwell. I will have the team realign them immediately. Thank you for catching that oversight." He signaled 2 workers to adjust the heavy wooden podiums. I watched the bottleneck dissolve, feeling a deep, quiet satisfaction. Identifying a flaw and implementing a rational solution provided a distinct type of joy. It was the same satisfaction I derived from fixing broken supply chains, just applied to a different landscape. I allowed my mind to briefly wander across the city, analyzing the stark contrast between this serene environment and my relative's current reality. Somewhere within a luxury downtown high-rise, my sister was undoubtedly experiencing a theatrical meltdown. I pictured Olivia standing in front of a brightly lit vanity mirror, applying heavy layers of cosmetics while simultaneously berating an unpaid intern over a mobile phone. She operated under the false assumption that social survival required constant, frantic motion. She equated anxiety with importance, believing that if she was not shouting, she was failing. My mother was likely hovering nearby, pacing the hardwood floors, issuing paranoid instructions about networking targets and photographic angles. They expended so much precious energy attempting to curate an illusion of control. My Memphis existence had taught me the exact opposite principle. True influence operates in silence. It does not require a megaphone or a temper tantrum. It only requires a sturdy, unshakable foundation. The heavy oak doors at the far end of the ballroom swung open, altering the atmospheric pressure of the room. Ethan stepped over the threshold. He wore a sharply tailored charcoal tuxedo that mirrored his quiet confidence. He did not strut or demand immediate attention from the working staff. He simply observed the environment, his sharp, analytical eyes taking in the lighting, the table arrangements, and the overall structural flow of the space. The event workers naturally parted for him, recognizing the implicit authority he carried. He navigated through the maze of dining tables, stopping a few feet away from me. He surveyed the adjusted auction podiums and offered a subtle nod of approval. The supply lines appear to be functioning flawlessly, he noted, a warm hint of amusement coloring his tone. I smoothed a stray wrinkle from the tablecloth beside me. "We eliminated the pedestrian bottlenecks," I replied, maintaining the subtle dual meaning of our conversation. The guests should flow into the main reception area without experiencing any frustrating delays. Efficiency reduces human friction. Ethan stepped closer, closing the physical distance between us. He reached out and gently brushed a stray lock of hair behind my ear. His fingers lingered briefly against my jawline, a silent, grounding gesture. He lowered his gaze to the brushed silver magnetic tag resting on my collarbone. "The chairwoman title suits you," he murmured. "It carries far less baggage than being a daughter," I answered. He held my gaze, studying my face for any lingering traces of doubt. He knew the heavy historical weight this specific evening carried. Tonight served as the inevitable intersection of my discarded past and my fortified present. He was offering me one final opportunity to express apprehension before the doors opened. "Are you prepared to face them?" he asked, his voice dropping into a private register meant only for my ears. The registry indicates they will arrive within the next hour. I reached up and gently adjusted the silk bow tie at his collar, ensuring the dark fabric sat perfectly symmetrical against his crisp, white shirt. The repetitive, calming motion anchored me in the present reality. 3 years ago, the mere thought of confronting Diane and Olivia would have sent my heart racing into a panicked, erratic rhythm. I would have felt my palms turn clammy. I would have instinctively searched for the nearest exit, seeking permission to disappear into the background. The woman adjusting the tuxedo tie felt none of those physical symptoms. My pulse remained steady and slow. My breathing was deep and measured. The internal conflict that had plagued my youth was officially resolved. I no longer harbored a secret, desperate wish for their validation. I did not crave a belated apology. I did not want them to see my worth because their metric for evaluating worth was fundamentally broken. I stopped waiting for a seat at their table, I told him, resting my hands flat against his chest. I built an entirely new table, and tonight, they are simply visitors in my house. Ethan smiled, the expression radiating a deep, profound respect. "We will let them enjoy the appetizers," he said, before taking a step back to review a final logistical detail with the venue coordinator. The final 60 minutes before the event doors open always possess a distinct electric tension. The catering staff vanished into the service corridors, leaving the grand ballroom pristine and silent. The lighting technicians dimmed the overhead chandeliers, activating the warm amber uplighting that bathed the walls in a golden glow. The string quartet arrived, taking their positions on a raised platform near the eastern windows, and began tuning their instruments. The soft, discordant notes of violins and cellos echoed through the vast space, signaling the impending transition from preparation to performance. I stood near the velvet ropes delineating the VIP lounge, holding a digital tablet containing the finalized guest roster. My thumb hovered over the screen, scrolling through the alphabetized rows of industry executives, media personalities, and local politicians. The digital clock in the corner of my screen ticked forward. A distinct, heavy click echoed from the grand entrance as the deadbolts were released. A low hum of voices began to filter through the main lobby. The Nashville elite were arriving, ready to consume the illusion my sister had frantically constructed over the past 3 weeks. I tucked the tablet under my arm and clasped my hands together. The anticipatory tension crackled in the air, thick and undeniable. I watched the grand archway, waiting for the familiar faces to emerge from the growing crowd. The administrative trap was fully armed, resting silently beneath the plush carpet. All that remained was for the uninvited guests to bypass the velvet rope and demand the very attention that would seal their destruction. The heavy oak doors remained open, allowing a steady current of local dignitaries and entertainment figures to flood the grand reception hall. The ambient noise level rose from a quiet hum to a deafening roar of overlapping conversations, clinking glassware, and the sharp bursts of camera flashes near the press wall. The Nashville social ecosystem operated on a rigid hierarchy dictated by visibility. To survive in this environment, a person needed to be seen interacting with the correct tier of influence. I stood behind the thick burgundy velvet rope separating the general ballroom from the private lounge. I held a sleek digital clipboard in my left hand, reviewing the final minimum bids for the silent charity auction. My posture remained relaxed but vigilant. I watched the crowd with the detached fascination of a biologist observing an ant colony. They clustered around the open bars, exchanging hollow compliments while subtly evaluating the cost of each other's jewelry. Then the dynamic of the entrance shifted. A new cluster of arrivals paused at the threshold, demanding the attention of the hired photographers. My family had arrived. They moved as a synchronized unit, performing a well-rehearsed routine designed to project limitless prosperity. Olivia walked slightly ahead, wearing a metallic silver gown that caught every available beam of light. The fabric draped elegantly across her shoulders, but I knew the garment represented a desperate financial gamble. It was a seasonal couture piece, likely purchased on a credit line she could no longer afford to pay off. She flashed a practiced, radiant smile toward the camera lenses, tilting her chin to ensure her best angle was captured. Noah walked beside her, wearing a bespoke navy tuxedo. He attempted to project the effortless swagger of a platinum-selling artist, but the performance appeared brittle. His jaw remained tight, and his eyes darted nervously across the room, scanning the crowd for anyone who could validate his presence. He looked less like a rising star and more like a man walking a tightrope without a safety net. Trailing closely behind them were my parents. Diane wore an emerald silk dress, her posture rigid and calculating. She directed John with subtle nudges of her elbow, positioning him perfectly for the group photographs. My father offered his standard placid grin, a man entirely content to let his wife navigate the turbulent waters of social warfare. They looked like royalty arriving to inspect their kingdom. The reality hidden beneath the silk and tailored wool was a terrifying deficit of capital and borrowed time. I lowered my clipboard and watched them transition from the press wall into the main ballroom. Diane immediately began scanning the crowd for networking targets. Her eyes swept across the floral arrangements, the dining tables, and the clustered groups of executives. Then her gaze snagged on the velvet rope guarding the exclusive section. She spotted the dark green fabric of my dress. She noticed the clipboard resting in my hand. Diane tapped Olivia's arm and pointed in my direction. I observed the physical shift in my sister. The radiant, performative smile vanished, instantly replaced by a sharp, familiar expression of entitled irritation. Olivia whispered something to Noah before altering her trajectory and marching directly toward my station. She did not pause at the boundary line. The velvet rope represented a physical barrier meant to deter unauthorized guests, but Olivia operated under the belief that rules only applied to the lower classes. She unhooked the brass clasp, letting the heavy rope drop to the marble floor with a dull thud, and stepped into the private enclosure. Her metallic gown swished loudly as she closed the distance between us. She did not offer a greeting. She did not ask how I was doing. She snapped her fingers twice in rapid succession, a sharp, stinging sound meant to command immediate obedience. "Hannah," she barked, her voice pitched to carry over the ambient noise of the party. "I sent you 4 emails this morning about the lighting in the western corridor. The amber gels are far too dim. The photographers cannot capture decent candids in that kind of shadow. You need to locate the lighting technicians and have them increase the exposure by at least 20%. I stood my ground, looking at her flushed face. She was projecting her mounting internal panic onto the nearest available target. Because she could not control the impending corporate audit destroying her department, she sought to control the wattage of a light bulb. Before I could formulate a response, Noah and Diane breached the perimeter, joining Olivia inside the restricted zone. Noah looked around the private lounge, inspecting the premium leather seating in the private bar. He ran a hand through his carefully styled hair, avoiding my eyes. "While you are tracking down the technicians," Olivia continued, her tone dripping with condescension, "fetch a drink for Noah. The main bars are suffocating right now. He needs a double pour of the reserve bourbon. The brand is kept behind the counter. Do not let the bartenders hand you the generic house liquor. He has a very specific palate." I looked at Noah, the man who had texted me in the middle of the night, seeking an emotional lifeboat. He stood there, letting my sister order me to serve him alcohol. His silence confirmed every logistical calculation I had made regarding his character. He was a hollow vessel, filling himself with whoever provided the easiest path forward. Diane stepped closer, invading my personal space. The scent of her heavy floral perfume masked the fresh eucalyptus arrangements nearby. She leaned in, narrowing her eyes into sharp, calculating slits. "Listen to me very carefully, Hannah," my mother warned, her voice dropping into a harsh whisper. "This evening is the most critical juncture of your sister's entire career. The executives from Caldwell Holdings are circulating in this very room. We are standing on a precipice. Do not humiliate us tonight with any of your bitter, resentful behavior. Do your little job. Check your lists. Serve the guests. Stay out of the sight lines." I absorbed their demands without flinching. A younger version of myself might have felt the hot sting of tears forming. A less secure woman might have raised her voice, pointing to the silver name tag resting on my collarbone, attempting to force their respect through a screaming match. But respect obtained through shouting is merely compliance born of annoyance. I desired something far more permanent. I wanted them to build their own trap. I raised my digital clipboard and retrieved the electronic stylus from its magnetic holder. I did not glare at my mother. I did not scowl at my sister. I offered a blank clinical expression. "I will make a note of the lighting adjustments," I stated, tapping the tip of the stylus against the glass screen. "Increase western corridor exposure by 20%. And a double pour of the reserve bourbon for the gentleman." I logged the fake request into a blank document. The physical act of writing seemed to appease their fragile egos. They required a physical demonstration of submission, and I gladly provided the illusion. By offering zero resistance, I validated their delusion of superiority. When a predator senses no struggle, they let their guard down. Olivia let out a loud, exasperated breath, smoothing the front of her metallic gown. Finally, she muttered, turning her attention back to the crowded ballroom. "At least try to be efficient about it. We do not have all night to wait on the service staff." Diane nodded in agreement, her posture relaxing slightly now that she believed the hierarchy was properly reestablished. She turned to Noah, offering a conspiratorial smile. "Just be patient, darling," Diane told him, her voice regaining its practiced warmth. "The wait will be worth it." Industry sources confirmed the new buyer is definitely attending tonight. We just need to locate Ethan Caldwell before the dinner service begins. Olivia retrieved a compact mirror from her designer clutch, checking her reflection with frantic intensity. "I have my pitch perfectly memorized," she declared, snapping the mirror shut. "The moment Caldwell steps into the main reception area, we are going to intercept him near the center tables. I will introduce Noah, highlight the recent streaming metrics, and position myself as the only executive capable of navigating the transition. Once Caldwell sees the optics of our partnership, he will have no choice but to authorize my promotion. We just need to corner him before the other label vice presidents get to him." I kept my eyes focused on the clipboard documenting their elaborate scheme. They were proudly broadcasting their intention to ambush a billionaire chief executive in the middle of a crowded charity function. They believed a forced introduction and a rehearsed sales pitch would somehow erase years of financial mismanagement and corporate theft. They viewed business the same way they viewed family, treating it as a performance that could be manipulated through sheer force of will. I tapped the stylus against the screen one final time and slid it back into the holder. I looked up, meeting my mother's expectant gaze. "I will ensure the beverage request is handled promptly," I said, my voice smooth and devoid of any mocking inflection. "Is there anything else you require while you wait for Mr. Caldwell to arrive?" Diane waved a dismissive hand, brushing me away like a nuisance insect. "Just do your job, Hannah. We have real business to conduct." She turned her back to me, linking her arm through Noah's jacket sleeve. Olivia stepped forward, leading their small contingent toward the edge of the private lounge, their eyes scanning the sea of faces for a man they had never met. They stood shoulder to shoulder, radiating an arrogant, desperate energy, waiting to spring their carefully laid trap. They did not need to search the room much longer. The object of their frantic ambition had already entered the private enclosure, stepping quietly through a side corridor while they were busy issuing their demands. The impending collision was no longer a matter of hours or minutes. The countdown had reached 0, and the architect of their corporate destruction was currently standing less than 10 feet away, waiting to be introduced. The grand reception hall buzzed with a frantic networking energy, a chaotic symphony of overlapping voices and clinking silverware. My mother, sister, and former boyfriend stood shoulder to shoulder, forming a barricade of desperate ambition, just inside the private enclosure. They kept their faces turned toward the main entrance, scanning the incoming crowds for a specific target. Their eyes darted past the serving staff and ignored the venue coordinators, focusing entirely on locating the billionaire they intended to ambush. They possessed an enormous blind spot. People who constantly search the horizon for salvation rarely notice the ground shifting directly beneath their own feet. Through a side corridor draped in heavy velvet curtains, Ethan stepped into the primary reception space. He moved with a quiet, grounded cadence that stood in stark contrast to the performative strutting of the Nashville executives surrounding him. He wore his tailored charcoal tuxedo, but he carried no clipboard, held no radio, and wore no identifying name tag. In a room where individuals loudly broadcasted their credentials through designer logos and heavy jewelry, Ethan projected authority through sheer stillness. He navigated the maze of high-top tables gracefully, avoiding the bustling waiters carrying trays of champagne. His gaze swept the perimeter before locking onto my position at the edge of the private lounge. As he walked toward me, I observed the subtle parting of the crowd. The attendees did not necessarily know his identity, but human instinct recognizes authentic power. They instinctively shifted aside, granting him an unobstructed path. My family remained entirely focused on the front doors, oblivious to his approach from their rear flank. Ethan stepped up beside me, standing close enough that his shoulder brushed against mine. He looked at the electronic tablet in my hand, then shifted his attention to the 3 tense figures standing a few feet away. His expression remained placid, revealing none of the historical context he possessed regarding the people occupying his venue. "Is there a logistical issue requiring my attention?" he asked, his voice a steady, low baritone that cut cleanly through the high-pitched ambient chatter. The sound of his voice caused Olivia to pivot sharply on her stiletto heels. Her metallic gown rustled like crushed foil. She turned her attention to the man standing beside me, and her eyes immediately initiated a rapid visual calculation. She scanned his bespoke lapels, noted the absence of a corporate lanyard, and evaluated his quiet, unbothered demeanor. In my sister's hierarchical worldview, a man surveying a room without a name tag while standing next to a logistics coordinator equaled upper management. She categorized Ethan as a senior venue director, or perhaps the head of hospitality services for the hotel. He represented authority, but in her mind, it was a service-oriented authority. He was staff. Olivia seized the opportunity to elevate her own status by diminishing mine in front of someone she perceived as my superior. "There is a significant issue," she announced, crossing her arms over her chest. Her tone adopted the shrill, demanding frequency of a dissatisfied patron at a luxury resort. "Your event coordinator here is demonstrating severe incompetence. We are priority guests for Sovereign Sound, and we requested a simple lighting adjustment 10 minutes ago." Instead of addressing the exposure problem, she is just standing here holding a tablet. Furthermore, the beverage service in this section is unacceptable. We have VIP needs, and your staff is ignoring us. I maintained a neutral expression, watching her construct a narrative based on a flawed hypothesis. I did not correct her assumption. Interrupting a person who is eagerly digging their own grave is poor strategy. Diane turned around, offering Ethan a tight, professional smile that she reserved for useful subordinates. "We understand hosting a charity function involves many moving parts," she interjected, her voice dripping with artificial sympathy. "However, my daughter is a senior executive dealing with intense industry pressure tonight. We simply expect the support staff to function with a bit more urgency. Perhaps you could reassign this young woman to the kitchen and bring us a coordinator who understands the stakes of this evening." Ethan looked at my mother, then shifted his gaze back to Olivia. He absorbed their insults with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing a volatile chemical reaction. He did not flush with anger. He did not rush to defend my honor through a shouting match. He simply let their entitlement hang in the chilled air conditioning, allowing the silence to stretch. Noah, sensing a prolonged gap in the conversation, decided to assert his own dominance. He needed to prove to Olivia and Diane that he belonged in this elevated social stratosphere. He took a step forward, invading Ethan's personal space. Noah held out his right hand, thrusting a heavy crystal highball glass toward Ethan's chest. The glass was empty save for a few melting ice cubes and a bruised lime wedge. Condensation dripped down the side, wetting Noah's fingers. "Be a pal and take this to the bar," Noah instructed, his voice attempting to mimic the casual arrogance of a seasoned celebrity. "Tell the bartender I need a double pour of the reserve bourbon. Keep the tab open under the Sovereign Sound account." The physical gesture hung suspended in the space between them. It was the ultimate test of the hierarchy they had fabricated in their minds. They expected Ethan to reflexively accept the dirty glass, apologize for the delay, and scurry off to fulfill the beverage order. Ethan did not raise his hand. He kept his arms resting loosely at his sides. He looked down at the sweaty crystal glass and then up into Noah's eyes. The rejection was silent, but it possessed a deafening resonance. The awkwardness of the unfulfilled command began to curdle the air. Noah's smile faltered, his outstretched arm stiffening, as he realized his authority was being flatly ignored. He gave the glass a small, impatient shake, rattling the ice cubes against the crystal walls. "I believe the service staff circulates near the primary beverage stations," Ethan stated, his tone polite but infused with an unyielding boundary. "I do not handle glassware." Noah blinked, a flush of embarrassment creeping up his neck. He lowered his arm, pulling the empty drink back against his own chest. Olivia let out a sharp scoff, offended by the insubordination. "Excuse me," she snapped, stepping forward to close ranks with her partner. "Do you possess any idea who we are waiting for tonight? We are scheduled to meet with the chief executive of Caldwell Holdings. If you refuse to accommodate our requests, I will personally ensure Mr. Caldwell hears about the profound lack of professionalism running his charity gala. I suggest you tell me your name right now so I can spell it correctly in my complaint." The architectural foundation of their curated reality was trembling. The stress fractures were visible in Olivia's frantic eyes and Noah's rigid posture. They were leaning all their weight against a door they believed led to salvation, entirely unaware that the door opened over a sheer cliff. Ethan offered a small, measured nod, acknowledging her threat. He reached into the inner pocket of his tuxedo jacket, moving with deliberate, unhurried grace. "My name is Ethan Caldwell," he replied. The two syllables landed in the center of their group like a dropped anvil. The ambient noise of the ballroom seemed to recede, fading into a muted, distant hum. Diane registered the surname first. Her eyes widened slightly, her calculating mind scrambling to reassemble the data points. She recognized the label Caldwell, but her ingrained prejudice refused to connect the unassuming man standing before her with the billionaire orchestrating the hostile takeover of her daughter's company. She searched for a rational compromise. "Caldwell," my mother repeated, her voice losing a fraction of its sharp edge. "Oh, I understand. You must be a relative A nephew, perhaps? Or a junior cousin, managing the venue operations for the family portfolio? It is wonderful that you are learning the hospitality business from the ground up. Please, let your uncle know that Sovereign Sound looks forward to a prosperous partnership. The desperation in her voice was palpable. She was attempting to network with an illusion, desperately trying to smooth over the insulting behavior they had just exhibited. She reached out, offering her hand for a formal shake. Ethan did not accept the handshake. He stood perfectly still, his posture radiating the undeniable weight of genuine ownership. He did not raise his voice to command their attention. He simply spoke the unvarnished truth, shattering the fragile glass house they had spent years meticulously decorating. "I am not a nephew," he stated, his baritone voice echoing with cold, factual precision. "I do not have an uncle managing this portfolio. I am the chief executive officer. I own Caldwell Holdings. I authorized the acquisition of Sovereign Sound." The color vanished from Olivia's face, draining away to leave a pale, chalky complexion beneath her heavy makeup. Noah took a physical step backward, his designer shoes scraping awkwardly against the marble floor. The realization crashed over them, washing away their arrogance and replacing it with a stark, suffocating terror. They had just spent the last 5 minutes snapping their fingers at and insulting the very architect of their corporate survival. Before they could formulate an apology, before Diane could launch into a frantic damage control script, Ethan delivered the final systemic blow. He turned his head slightly, looking directly at me. His gaze was warm, providing a stark contrast to the glacial energy he directed at my relatives. He reached out and placed his hand gently against the small of my back, a gesture of undeniable, intimate partnership. He looked back at my mother, whose hand was still hovering uselessly in the empty air, and the event coordinator you just tried to banish to the kitchen. He added the words, landing with devastating finality, "is my wife." "You're speaking to the chairwoman of this foundation." The collision was total. The physics of their deception failed them all at once. The transactional world they utilized to evaluate human worth short-circuited, unable to process the data currently standing in front of them. The quiet, dependable logistics manager they had edited out of their family portrait was currently holding the deed to the entire gallery. The syllables of my husband's declaration hung in the chilled air conditioning. For a fraction of a second, the universe seemed to pause. Then, the physics of their manufactured reality collapsed. Noah's fingers went completely slack. The heavy crystal highball glass slipped from his weakened grip. Gravity claimed the vessel, pulling it downward in agonizing slow motion. It struck the polished marble floor with a sharp, concussive crack. Fragmented ice and sharp shards of crystal exploded outward, scattering across the pristine tiles. The pungent aroma of aged reserve bourbon immediately filled the vicinity, masking the scent of expensive perfumes. The sharp noise acted as a disruptive beacon. The ambient chatter in our immediate radius evaporated. Several heads turned in our direction. Among the curious onlookers were the society photographers stationed near the press wall. They swiveled their heavy camera lenses toward the commotion, their flashes firing in rapid succession, bathing our small group in harsh, strobing light. Diane resembled a statue carved from chalk. The practiced, arrogant warmth drained entirely from her face, leaving a hollow, ashen complexion. Her calculating mind, a machine normally capable of processing immense social currency, had encountered a fatal systemic error. The arithmetic no longer computed. The daughter she had discarded as a worthless asset was currently standing beside the billionaire, holding the deed to their entire ecosystem. My mother opened her mouth to speak, but her vocal cords produced zero sound. Olivia, however, operated on a different frequency of desperation. Her survival mechanism relied entirely on optics. When she noticed the camera flashes illuminating the VIP lounge, Her public relations training hijacked her paralyzed nervous system. She needed to control the narrative before the whispers began. If the photographers captured her standing in stunned silence before the Caldwell chief executive, the society blogs would tear her apart by morning. She attempted to rewrite history in real time. She forced a wide, trembling smile onto her painted lips. The expression looked agonizingly brittle, like a porcelain mask ready to splinter. She lunged forward, thrusting her arms outward, attempting to pull me into a tight, manufactured sisterly embrace. She wanted to project a united family front for the lenses, implying that she had been privy to this grand secret all along, showcasing her elite insider status. I did not retreat, but I did not accept the illusion. I took one deliberate step backward, establishing a precise spatial distance. I raised my right hand, keeping my palm flat and rigid in the empty air between us. It was a gesture of absolute physical boundary. Olivia hit that invisible wall and stopped abruptly. Her outstretched arms faltered, hovering awkwardly for a moment before dropping uselessly to her sides. The frantic smile cracked, slipping away to reveal the raw, unadulterated panic churning underneath. "Do not perform for the cameras using my presence," I stated, my voice pitched low but carrying a heavy, resonant authority. "The era of utilizing my identity to salvage your public image concluded 3 years ago." "Hannah, please," Olivia stammered, her voice cracking into a high, desperate pitch. "We did not know. Why did you not tell us? We are your family." "We can explain everything. This is just a huge misunderstanding." Before I could dissect her hollow plea, the perimeter of our conversation expanded. The shattering glass had not only attracted the press, it had drawn the attention of a small, formidable contingent of individuals moving deliberately through the crowd. These were not local Nashville socialites hoping to network. They were senior board members of Caldwell Holdings, a cadre of sharply dressed men and women possessing genuine corporate leverage. They approached our location, forming a quiet, intimidating semicircle around Ethan. They observed my mother, my sister, and the trembling music producer with cool, clinical detachment. The board members recognized the unmistakable scent of a distressed asset. Ethan offered a brief, subtle nod to his colleagues, acknowledging their arrival, but keeping his focus entirely centered on the situation at hand. The dynamic shifted from a private family dispute into a public corporate tribunal. The interpersonal conflict had officially escalated into a systemic professional reckoning. A lesser person might have seized this audience to scream. A vindictive individual might have relished the opportunity to hurl insults, listing every historical grievance, every stolen birthday, and every manipulated holiday. I felt zero desire to raise my voice. Shouting indicates a lack of control, and I possessed absolute, total command of the environment. "There is zero misunderstanding to clarify," I articulated, addressing my sister, but ensuring my words carried enough volume for Diane and the assembled executives to hear clearly. "I am not orchestrating a theatrical revenge plot. I did not construct a grand conspiracy to humiliate you in this ballroom tonight. I am merely a spectator, observing the natural consequences of your own methodology." I lowered my hand, folding my arms neatly, holding the digital clipboard against my chest. "You built your entire kingdom on the premise that loyalty is a commodity and human beings are disposable stepping stones." I continued, the words flowing with cold, factual precision. "You stole, you manipulated, and you funded a fake legacy using unauthorized resources. You assumed you could operate with impunity because you always selected targets who were too polite or too conditioned to fight back." Noah shifted his weight, staring at the puddle of bourbon seeping into the grout lines of the marble floor. He looked like a man searching for a hidden trapdoor. "But you made a catastrophic logistical error," I said, my gaze sweeping across the three of them. You built your fragile house of cards on a platform you did not own, and you arrogantly assumed the ground would never shift. I did not summon these executives. I did not freeze your operational budgets. I simply stepped out of your way and allowed your own profound corporate incompetence to catch up with you. You demanded VIP treatment from the very individuals auditing your fraudulent ledgers. Diane finally managed to draw a ragged breath. Her hands trembled visibly, clutching her designer evening bag as if it were a life preserver. Hannah, she whispered, her tone entirely devoid of its usual venom. You are destroying your sister's career. I shook my head, rejecting the accusation with a simple structural truth. I am a logistics manager, Diane. I organize data. I do not destroy careers. I merely present the balance sheets. Olivia destroyed her own career the moment she decided aesthetics were more valuable than ethics. The tension in the VIP lounge morphed from social awkwardness into a stark administrative chill. The cameras had stopped flashing, the photographers sensing a toxicity that could not be easily packaged for a lifestyle magazine. The board members standing behind Ethan remained silent, their expressions hardening as they processed the implications of my statement regarding fraudulent ledgers. Olivia looked around the circle, realizing the performative tactics that had secured her early success were entirely useless in this arena. Charm cannot combat arithmetic. She realized her title, her wardrobe, and her industry connections held zero currency in the court of Caldwell Holdings. But the systemic destruction was not yet complete. A verbal reprimand, while satisfying, lacks the permanent, unarguable finality of documented proof. Emotional arguments can be debated later, twisted into new narratives and spun into victimhood. I required an anchor of absolute reality to ensure they could never rewrite the history of this evening. I turned my attention to the leather portfolio resting on the small cocktail table behind me. It contained the exact item required to finalize the transaction. The forensic accountants had delivered their preliminary findings just hours before the gala commenced. The transition from an uncomfortable social encounter to a devastating legal reality was imminent. I reached for the thick manila envelope, preparing to drop the administrative hammer that would permanently liquidate the Fernandez family delusion. I turned toward the small glass cocktail table positioned near the velvet rope. Resting on the polished surface sat a slim, black leather portfolio. I unzipped the main compartment. The metallic rasp of the zipper sounded incredibly loud in the localized silence of our circle. I reached inside and retrieved a standard legal-sized manila envelope. It was not sealed with golden wax. It featured no elegant calligraphy. It represented the blunt, unglamorous mechanics of corporate accountability. I held the envelope out, extending it toward my sister. Olivia stared at the brown paper as if I were offering her a live explosive. Her chest heaved, struggling to draw oxygen into her lungs. She refused to raise her hands. She knew on a primal level that touching the document meant accepting the reality printed inside it. She understood that aesthetics could not combat a paper trail. "Take it, Olivia," I instructed, my voice devoid of malice or triumph. I am merely the courier, delivering the final tally. She reached out her fingers, trembling so severely the thick paper rattled against her manicured nails. She fumbled with the metal clasp, bending the prongs back and sliding a stack of stapled documents from the interior. The top page featured the official letterhead of a prominent forensic accounting firm based in New York. The subsequent pages contained densely packed spreadsheets highlighting discrepancies in bold, red ink. Olivia scanned the first paragraph. Her eyes widened, tracking the columns of numbers. Her breathing grew shallow and rapid. "Let me summarize the findings to expedite this process," I said, stepping closer to ensure my words remained contained within our immediate group. The auditors tracked the missing operational capital from your department. They located the exact routing numbers linking corporate accounts to unauthorized personal expenditures. They unraveled the knot you spent 3 years tying. I shifted my gaze to the man standing a few feet away. Noah still stared at the shattered remains of his bourbon glass, the amber liquid pooling around the toes of his designer shoes. They flagged a specific wire transfer executed last month. I continued, keeping my tone conversational but clinical. $14,000 diverted from a promotional budget meant for an upcoming independent band. That exact amount was wired to a luxury jeweler in downtown Nashville. I looked pointedly at Noah's left wrist. The platinum chronograph with the midnight blue dial caught the ambient light, mocking the silence. You did not secure that timepiece for a priority client, I noted, confirming the logistical mismatch I had identified at that Sunday dinner years ago. You purchased it using stolen corporate funds to decorate a man who possesses zero actual industry momentum. The auditors also identified 6 months of premium recording studio rental fees paid directly from the label expense account, sessions that produced 0 usable tracks. You operated a fraudulent charity to sustain a parasite. Noah physically recoiled, pulling his arm behind his back as if attempting to hide the stolen merchandise from the gaze of the Caldwell Holdings board members standing nearby. The realization struck him with physical force. He was wearing stolen property in a room filled with corporate executives and legal representatives. His entire manufactured persona evaporated, leaving behind a hollow, frightened imposter. He looked toward the exit doors, his survival instincts overriding his performative arrogance. Olivia dropped the audit papers. The pages fluttered to the marble floor landing near the broken crystal. She turned her frantic gaze toward Ethan, her breathing ragged, her metallic gown losing its luster in the shadow of her impending ruin. "You cannot do this to me," she pleaded, the performative veneer cracking to reveal raw desperation. "You are the chief executive. You possess the authority to overlook these discrepancies. We can establish a repayment plan. I will sign whatever non-disclosure agreement your legal team requires. I will work for free to balance the ledgers. Please do not fire me tonight." Ethan looked at her with an expression of mild, polite confusion. The board members standing behind him remained impassive, acting as silent guardians of the corporate ledger. They observed her panic, the way doctors observe a terminal symptom. "I am not terminating your employment, Ms. Fernandez," Ethan replied, his baritone voice steady and resolute. "I do not possess the capacity to fire you." A fleeting spark of hope ignited in Olivia's eyes. She interpreted his statement through her distorted lens of entitlement, believing she had somehow secured a reprieve. She assumed his quiet demeanor signaled a willingness to negotiate. Diane exhaled a shaky breath, stepping forward to capitalize on the perceived hesitation. My mother reached out, preparing to launch into a speech about potential synergies and brand management. I explained the mechanism behind his refusal, shattering her temporary relief. "My husband is not firing you because Caldwell Holdings refuses to acquire active liabilities," I clarified, outlining the harsh architecture of corporate mergers. During the final acquisition negotiations yesterday afternoon, Ethan's legal team presented this audit to the current board of Sovereign Sound. They established a firm condition for the buyout. Caldwell Holdings demanded a sanitized ledger before signing the transfer documents. They refuse to inherit thieves. I watched the truth sink into her skin. The blood drained entirely from her face, leaving her looking small and remarkably ordinary. "Your parent company terminated your contract 4 hours ago," I stated, delivering the factual payload. "Human Resources sent the official severance notice to your corporate inbox while you were busy driving to this venue demanding catering upgrades. You are standing in this ballroom, wearing a dress you cannot afford, networking for a job you no longer hold. You are a trespasser. The finality of the statement removed all remaining oxygen from their lungs. Olivia swayed on her high heels, reaching out to steady herself against a tall cocktail table. She looked at Noah, seeking the supportive partner she had bankrolled for 3 years. Noah took another step backward, distancing himself from the toxic epicenter of her collapse. He offered zero comfort, proving my theory that a transaction built on theft offers no shelter during a storm. Diane, recognizing that the professional arena was officially lost, reverted to her oldest, most practiced tactic. She abandoned the persona of a powerful Nashville socialite and embraced emotional manipulation. She sought to weaponize biology, hoping to extract mercy through a performance of maternal grief. My mother stepped between Olivia and me. Tears welled in her eyes, spilling over her carefully applied mascara. Her lower lip trembled, projecting an image of a heartbroken matriarch desperately trying to keep her flock together. "How can you do this to your own sister?" Diane wept, her voice breaking into a fragile plea meant to invoke guilt. "We are your blood, Hannah. We raised you. We shared a home. Family takes care of family. You must ask Ethan to reverse this decision. You must protect us." The phrase hung in the air. Family takes care of family. It was the exact sentence she had weaponized against me countless times to extract my resources, my time, and my dignity. She utilized the concept of family as a currency only when she needed to fund her own deficit. When she required a sacrifice, I was family. When she required a spotlight, I was an inconvenience to be edited out of the frame. I looked at the tears streaking her cheeks. I felt zero empathy. I felt only the profound, liberating emptiness of a closed account. "You chose your image over your family years ago." I said the words, dropping like heavy stones into a calm pond. "You engineered a betrayal because you believed aesthetics were more valuable than loyalty. You traded my future for a favorable networking opportunity. You pushed my partner to choose Olivia because she had a real career, and you told me my stability was worthless." I stepped closer, forcing her to hold my gaze. I did not raise my voice, but the sheer density of the truth forced her to shrink backward. "You do not get to claim the title of family now, just because the image you purchased went bankrupt," I told her. "You engineered this dynamic. You taught me that relationships are merely transactions evaluated on a balance sheet. Today, I am simply declining your credit. The account is permanently closed." Diane stood paralyzed, the fake tears stalling on her face. The realization that her emotional extortion held zero leverage left her entirely defenseless. She possessed no other tools in her arsenal. The capable daughter had permanently sealed the vault. I turned back to the leather portfolio securing the zipper. I looked at Ethan, who offered a subtle nod of solidarity. The structural dismantling was complete. The fraudulent foundation they had spent years reinforcing was currently resting in pieces on the marble floor. But the ensuing shockwave would soon force the weakest elements of their alliance to scatter, proving that parasitic attachments dissolve the moment the host runs out of resources, setting the stage for a highly public and utterly humiliating exit. The security detail assigned to the Caldwell Holdings executive stepped forward. They maintained a respectful distance, but their physical presence established a firm, undeniable perimeter. The quiet instruction required no verbal translation. The uninvited guests needed to vacate the premises immediately. I watched Diane, John, Olivia, and Noah retreat toward the grand entrance. Their departure mirrored a solemn funeral procession. The Nashville elite, possessing highly tuned instincts for corporate decay, parted silently to let them pass. Whispers spread through the ballroom, catching fire like dry kindling. The attendees lacked the exact details of the forensic audit, but they recognized the universal posture of ruin. Olivia stumbled slightly on her stilettos. Her metallic gown dragged heavily across the marble floor, losing its glamorous luster in the shadows of the exit corridor. Noah walked several paces ahead of her, creating a visible physical gap. That small distance signaled the impending fracture of their alliance. My father kept his head bowed, staring intently at his shoes, while Diane desperately tried to maintain a rigid spine. They exited through the heavy oak doors, disappearing into the humid night air. They left behind a legacy composed of shattered crystal and exposed fraud. The weekend passed with a deceptive stillness. Monday morning initiated the true administrative fallout. Modern corporate scandals rarely remain contained within private boardrooms. They bleed quickly into the digital ecosystem. A prominent music industry blog published a detailed exposé regarding the Sovereign Sound restructuring. The article cited anonymous sources detailing a sweeping financial investigation and the sudden termination of a high-ranking talent executive. The journalist omitted Olivia's name directly, but the Nashville social circuit required zero help connecting the data points. I sat at my desk in Memphis, monitoring the digital deterioration from a safe distance. I opened Olivia's primary social media profile. For years, she utilized that platform as a weapon, projecting a flawless aesthetic designed to manufacture envy. Now, the comment sections beneath her glossy photographs transformed into a public tribunal. Industry peers began asking pointed questions about the misappropriated promotional budgets. Independent artists she had neglected voiced their deep frustrations. By Tuesday afternoon, the external pressure breached her defensive walls. Olivia switched her profile to private, locking the account and silencing her digital megaphone. The brands that previously sponsored her lifestyle quietly severed their partnerships. The luxury boutiques where she held extensive credit lines froze her accounts. Her curated reality evaporated, proving that a kingdom built on stolen capital possesses zero structural integrity when the funding inevitably stops. The most profound poetic justice arrived on Thursday. It materialized not through a legal summons, but through a calculated public relations maneuver. Noah recognized that remaining attached to an exiled embezzler would drown his own fragile career. He possessed zero genuine loyalty. He operated purely on a parasitic survival instinct. When a host organism begins to die, the parasite must detach and seek a new source of nourishment. He drafted a sterile, unfeeling statement and published it across all his social channels. The text read like a legal disclaimer. Noah announced the termination of his engagement to Olivia, citing unforeseen personal differences and a desire to focus entirely on his independent, creative projects. He requested privacy during a difficult transition. He offered no defense of her character. He provided zero emotional support. He simply severed the tie and walked away. I read the statement while drinking my morning tea. The symmetry of the situation was striking. 3 years ago, my parents orchestrated a transaction offering Noah a richer host. He took the deal, leaving me sitting at a dining room table without a single word of apology. Now, he executed the exact same maneuver against their golden child. He abandoned Olivia in the exact isolated position she had helped orchestrate for me. Diane and John had engineered a betrayal to secure a prince for their favorite daughter. The cold arithmetic of Noah's exit proved they merely purchased a mercenary. He took the designer clothes, the expensive watches, and the premium studio sessions funded by stolen money. The moment the auditing team closed the vault, he packed his bags and vanished. He left Olivia to face the federal investigators alone. The social exile of my parents followed a similar ruthless trajectory. Diane spent her entire adult life cultivating relationships with the country club elite. She believed those connections were forged through mutual respect and shared values. She failed to realize that elite circles operate like fragile stock markets. They only invest in climbing assets. As the week progressed, Diane attempted her standard damage control protocols. She initiated phone calls to the wives of prominent label executives, hoping to spin the termination as a voluntary resignation. Her calls routed directly to voicemail. She scheduled lunch reservations at her preferred upscale bistros, only to find her usual networking targets canceling at the last minute, citing vague scheduling conflicts. The women she once gossiped with now viewed her as a social contagion. Associating with the mother of a terminated executive under federal investigation posed too high a risk to their own reputations. My father experienced a similar quarantine at his golf club. Men who previously shared cigars and industry rumors suddenly found reasons to play the back nine in different groups. John preferred to avoid friction, letting Diane manage their social portfolio. Now that the portfolio was bankrupt, he possessed no tools to navigate the heavy silence. They were exiled from the very world they sacrificed their eldest daughter to join. They traded my loyalty for a velvet rope that was ultimately used to lock them out. I observed this entire sequence of events without experiencing a single urge to gloat. Gloating requires an emotional investment in the pain of your adversaries. I felt no joy watching my sister lose her career. I felt no triumph reading about my mother's quarantine. I only experienced the quiet, deep satisfaction of a balanced ledger. The natural order of reality reasserted itself. A system constructed on deception requires constant, exhausting maintenance to remain upright. It demands a continuous influx of stolen energy. My family spent decades treating human beings as disposable batteries, draining their resources to power a false aesthetic. When you remove the batteries, the machine simply powers down. Ethan returned home from the corporate office late Friday evening. He loosened his tie and set his briefcase near the entryway. The acquisition of Sovereign Sound was officially complete. He spent the week restructuring the remaining departments, liquidating the toxic assets, and installing competent leadership. He walked into the kitchen and leaned against the counter, watching me prepare dinner. The warm light from the pendant fixtures cast a soft glow across the room. He did not boast about the successful takeover. He treated the corporate victory as a standard operational procedure. The final employment severances were processed today, he informed me, his tone conversational and relaxed. The forensic team handed their findings over to the regulatory agencies. The label will survive, but it requires a drastic cultural shift. I nodded, sliding a tray of roasted vegetables into the oven. Did you encounter any further resistance from the former talent division? I asked, referencing my sister without using her name. Ethan shook his head. They cleared out her office on Wednesday. Security boxed up her personal items and sent them via standard freight to her condominium. She did not attempt to access the building. The mental image of Olivia's designer belongings, packed into cheap cardboard boxes and shipped via standard freight, offered a fitting conclusion. She spent her life demanding premium treatment and priority access. In the end, her legacy was reduced to a standard shipping manifest. I closed the oven door and turned to face my husband. The air in our Memphis home felt lighter, free from the heavy, dense atmospheric pressure that always accompanied my interactions with Nashville. The administrative storm had passed, leaving the landscape washed clean. The toxic structures were demolished, and the debris was swept away by the natural currents of consequence. We sat down to eat our meal in comfortable silence. We did not discuss the Fernandez family any further. They consumed enough of my time, my energy, and my mental bandwidth. They no longer warranted a place in our daily dialogue. The story of their ambitious rise and devastating fall belonged to the gossip columnists and the federal auditors now. My role in their narrative officially concluded. The final weeks of autumn settled over the Mississippi River Valley, bringing a crisp, defining chill to the morning air. I sat on the wraparound cedar porch of our Memphis home, wrapped in a thick woven blanket, holding a ceramic mug of black tea. The sun crested over the distant tree line, casting long golden shadows across the flat expanse of the water. Freight barges moved slowly along the muddy current, navigating their routes with heavy, inevitable momentum. I watched them glide past, appreciating their steady, unhurried progress. The landscape offered zero pretense. It simply existed, functional and enduring. Ethan sat in the wicker chair beside me, reading a physical newspaper. The rustle of the broadsheet pages and the distant cry of a river bird provided the only soundtrack to our morning. My phone rested face up on the small wooden table between us. It had remained silent for days, stripped of the frantic notifications that used to define my connection to Nashville. The quiet felt luxurious. Then the screen illuminated. A single text message arrived, disrupting the digital calm. The contact name displayed read, John Fernandez. My father had not reached out since the night he walked out of the charity gala, staring at his designer shoes. I did not feel a sudden spike of cortisol. My heart rate maintained its slow, steady rhythm. The physical anxiety that used to accompany any communication from my relatives had vanished entirely. I picked up the device and opened the message. It was a sprawling, disjointed paragraph extending far beyond the boundaries of a standard text. He began with a hollow greeting, asking about the weather in West Tennessee, a classic maneuver to avoid addressing the central conflict. He utilized mundane small talk as a buffer against accountability. He then pivoted into a rambling defense of his and Diane's behavior. He wrote about the crushing expectations of the entertainment sector, claiming that the label executives demanded a certain aesthetic from Olivia and Noah. He suggested that their hands were tied by social obligations and the fierce competition of the industry. He peppered the text with phrases meant to shift the burden of guilt away from his own shoulders. "You know how your mother gets," he wrote, followed closely by, "The industry forces people to make hard choices to survive." He offered zero genuine accountability. He framed the betrayal, the theft, and the emotional extortion as unfortunate side effects of their geographic location. In his narrative, they were all merely victims of Nashville itself. I read the glowing text, tracking his predictable evasions. A younger version of me might have crafted a lengthy analytical response, pointing out the logical fallacies in his argument. I might have reminded him that geography does not force a person to embezzle corporate funds or discard their eldest daughter. I could have drafted a clinical breakdown of his cowardice, highlighting his lifelong habit of looking away while his wife orchestrated my erasure. But engaging with a person committed to their own delusion is a poor allocation of resources. You cannot teach a man to read a balance sheet when he refuses to open his eyes. He did not want forgiveness. He wanted permission to stop feeling uncomfortable. He wanted me to absorb his guilt the same way I used to absorb their logistical burdens. I tapped the screen, navigating to the contact settings menu. I did not type a single letter in reply. I pressed the option labeled, "Block this caller." A brief prompt asked me to confirm the action. I tapped, "Confirm." The digital connection severed instantly and permanently. I repeated the process for Diane and Olivia, purging their numerical identities from my device. I set the phone back on the wooden table face down. Ethan folded his newspaper, resting it on his knee. He glanced at the phone and then looked at me, his expression inquiring but respectful of my space. He did not ask for a detailed report. He simply waited for me to offer whatever information I felt necessary to share. "My father sent a message," I told him, keeping my voice light and conversational. He blamed the corporate culture for their decisions. He asked if we could move past the awkwardness and eventually share a holiday dinner. Ethan took a sip of his coffee, his eyes studying the calm surface of the river. "How did you respond?" he asked. "I blocked his number," I replied, picking up my mug. "The account is officially closed." A warm, genuine smile spread across Ethan's face. He reached over and squeezed my hand, his touch conveying a profound depth of understanding. "Some debts are never meant to be collected," he said softly. "Some ledgers are better left abandoned." He was entirely correct. For nearly 3 decades, I operated under the assumption that if I just worked hard enough, if I remained dependable and quiet, my relatives would eventually recognize my value. I believed I could earn a permanent place inside their exclusive circle. I thought my utility would eventually translate into affection. I took a slow sip of my tea, letting the warmth spread through my chest. The girl who stood shivering in a department store watching her winter coat get returned to fund a pageant dress no longer existed. The woman sitting on this porch required zero validation from people who measured love in borrowed currency. I spent my youth desperately trying to avoid being edited out of their picture. I failed to realize that their picture was merely a cheap forgery hanging in a crumbling hallway. Stepping out of their frame allowed me the freedom to purchase the entire gallery. I no longer needed to shrink myself to fit into their curated aesthetic. I possessed a life built on solid, unyielding ground. The social exile they were currently experiencing in Middle Tennessee was not a tragedy orchestrated by a bitter sibling. It was the simple mathematical result of their own equations. They subtracted truth from their lives until they were left with a devastating 0. My departure did not leave me empty. Losing a toxic family is the admission price you pay for a life rooted in honesty, stability, and genuine partnership. I looked at Ethan, watching the morning sunlight catch the sharp angles of his profile. He represented everything my former environment rejected. He valued substance over style, integrity over influence, and quiet truth over loud performances. We built a fortress that no amount of social maneuvering could ever breach. The air felt incredibly light. The heavy, dense atmospheric pressure that used to govern my existence was gone, replaced by the clean, functional breeze of the river valley. I leaned back in my chair, pulling the woven blanket tighter around my shoulders. I did not harbor any lingering anger. Anger is a tether linking you to the source of your pain. I had cut the tether, severing the final thread connecting Memphis to Nashville. That is the conclusion of my story. A stolen watch, a misspelled invitation, and a corporate audit that dismantled a kingdom built on lies. The quiet logistics manager finally stopped managing their chaos and let the system correct itself. If you have ever been the daughter expected to subsidize the success of the golden child, step out of the shadows. Stop accepting the role of the invisible scaffolding. You are not required to fund a production that refuses to put your name on the marquee. Build your own fortress. Surround yourself with individuals who respect your boundaries and value your intellect over your utility. Leave a comment and share your own journey of walking away from a rigged game, because I read every single one. Thank you for listening to Amanda Told Stories. Keep your boundaries firm, trust your own data, and remember that the truth always keeps the receipts. We spend our lives surrounded by curated images of the American family. We see them in holiday cards, glossy lifestyle magazines, and perfectly framed portraits hanging over suburban fireplaces. But frames only capture what we are meant to see. They deliberately exclude the heavy, often painful shadows stretching just beyond their borders. The story of Hannah Fernandez, her sister Olivia, and a family fractured by blind ambition is not simply a tale of corporate vengeance or a satisfying dramatic comeuppance. At its very core, It is a devastating examination of parenting, family responsibility, and the perilous consequences of treating children as assets on a balance sheet. When we raise our children in a culture that increasingly equates visibility with value and consumerism with character, we risk losing the fundamental soul of what a family is supposed to be. In traditional American family structures, parents are meant to serve as the ultimate safe harbor. They are tasked with the sacred responsibility of offering unconditional love, fairness, and emotional awareness, guiding their children toward a life of integrity. Yet Diane and John Fernandez represent a tragic, all too common distortion of these foundational parenting values. They looked at their two daughters and saw a diversified portfolio rather than two human beings. Olivia, with her flashy career in the Nashville music scene and her proximity to fame, was their blue-chip stock, an investment that yielded immediate social dividends and country club bragging rights. Hannah, with her quiet stability, profound intellect, and logistical brilliance, was treated as an operational expense. By actively brokering Hannah's long-term relationship to secure Olivia's networking advantage, these parents committed the ultimate familial betrayal. They taught their children that love is conditional, determined entirely by one's ability to fund the family's public image. This transactional approach to parenting strips children of their inherent worth, replacing emotional intelligence with cold, calculating arithmetic. It sends a chilling message that stability and dependability are merely resources to be mined, while loud, performative arrogance is the only currency that matters. We instinctively pity the scapegoat, the invisible daughter relegated to the background, forced to build her own resilience from the meager scraps of her parents' attention. But if we look closely at the long-term trajectory of this dynamic, the guidance provided to the golden child is equally, if not more, destructive. In their desperate bid to elevate Olivia, Diane, and John, shielded her from the natural friction and consequences of reality. They funded her delusions, encouraged her entitlement, and validated her thefts, completely abandoning their duty to provide long-term moral guidance. They failed to impart the crucial values of honesty, hard work, and fairness. Instead, they taught her that aesthetics can conquer arithmetic, that rules only apply to the unremarkable, and that success is something you can steal rather than earn. By failing to hold her accountable, they did not prepare her for the harsh realities of the world. They led her directly into a trap of her own making. When the federal auditors finally arrived to dismantle her fraudulent kingdom, Olivia possessed no moral scaffolding, no resilience, and no genuine professional skills to keep herself upright. The parents' ultimate failure was not just in their cruelty toward Hannah, but in their absolute, systematic ruin of Olivia. There is a pervasive, almost sacred phrase echoed in living rooms and dining tables across the country. Family takes care of family. It is a cornerstone of traditional family ideology meant to evoke a sense of deep, unwavering security. But in households completely devoid of emotional awareness and fairness, this beautiful sentiment is frequently weaponized. It transforms from a blanket of security into a chain of extortion. For Hannah, this phrase was utilized to demand her silent compliance while she was robbed of her partner, her dignity, and her rightful place at the table. It was invoked to demand wholesale catering discounts for a sister who had stolen her life, all to preserve an illusion for strangers. True family responsibility is a reciprocal pact built on mutual respect, healthy boundaries, and unwavering honesty. It is not a blank check written to excuse toxic behavior, nor is it a mandate to endure endless disrespect. When parents demand blind loyalty without offering safety in return, they are not building a family. They are operating a cult of personality. Hannah's triumph lies in her profound realization that she did not have to play a rigged game. By aligning herself with a partner who valued her mind and integrity, she modeled the very values her parents lacked: accountability, boundaries, and the courage to look at a failing system and walk away. If you have ever found yourself standing on the edges of your own family's photograph, wondering why your quiet stability was ignored while someone else's chaos was endlessly celebrated, you are not alone. There is immense liberating power in recognizing that you do not have to absorb the cost of someone else's delusion. I invite you to subscribe and follow Amanda Told Stories. Join our growing community where we share the lived experiences of quiet women who stop carrying the heavy burdens of others, step out of the shadows, and finally learn to choose themselves. Leave a comment below and share your own journey of building a life outside the frame. As we close the ledger on the Fernandez family, we are forced to look deeply into our own reflections. From the moment we are born, we are conditioned by society to believe that the bond of blood is the most sacred contract we will ever sign. We are taught that it is a biological imperative demanding our endless forgiveness, our infinite grace, and our continual sacrifice. We are told that family is a permanent, unconditional home that we must protect at all costs, regardless of the toll it takes on our own spirits. But perhaps that is the greatest, most devastating lie we have ever been sold. Blood does not entitle anyone to your peace. Biology is merely a coincidence of birth. It is not a lifetime subscription to your suffering or a mandate to endure abuse. Conventional wisdom insists that we must continually repair the bridges to our past, no matter how many times we are burned crossing them. But the truth, the cold, unapologetic, and profoundly liberating truth, is that some bridges are meant to be burned to the ground so that the fire can light the way to your actual home. Family is not a genetic inheritance you are forced to accept. Family is who is still standing beside you when the curated facade shatters, the performance ends, and the truth is the only thing left in the room.